Hey guys, tonight we slip backward into a world where the night is thicker, heavier, and more absolute than anything you've ever known. You stand in the middle of a cramped medieval street, and when the sun goes down, it really goes down. No streetlights, no neon signs, no phone screens secretly lighting your blankets at midnight, just a slow fade to black as the last candle in the window gets pinched out. For a moment, you can't see your own hand, and you feel that little instinctive shiver. The one that reminds you that if you lived here for real, you probably wouldn't survive this for very long. The air smells like wood smoke, damp earth, and too many people living too close together. Somewhere, a dog barks once and then goes quiet. You hear a door bar slide shut, iron on wood, and shutters creak close as families seal themselves in, surrendering to the long hours of darkness. Above you, the stars feel closer than they ever do in your own sky, like someone scattered pinpricks of frost on a black velvet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you want to, drop your location and local time in the comments. Imagine your dot on a modern, glowing world map while we wander through a time when night meant something very different. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drift down the street, your steps quiet, your breath fogging in the chill. In the Middle Ages, people respect the dark in a way you probably don't have to. Without electricity, night is a real force that shapes every part of life, especially sleep. Historians still argue whether people were more afraid of the dark or just deeply practical about it. But either way, no one's casually wandering around like it's a 24-hour convenience store. You glance up at a narrow upper window. Behind the shutters, a family is already settling in. Inside, there's a single room doing the job of kitchen, living room, and bedroom. A small fire burns low on the hearth, more embers than flame now, because no one wants to risk a house fire while they sleep. Fire is life in the daytime and a quiet little death threat at night. One stray spark, one overturned candle, and the entire timbered row could go up like the worst kind of surprise birthday candle. You step through their door in your imagination like a quiet ghost. The ceiling beams are low enough that you might bump your head if you're tall. Smoke curls lazily upward, finding its way out through a small hole or crooked chimney. The bed, or what passes for one, is a simple wooden frame or maybe just a mound of straw on the floor covered in rough linen. It rustles when people move. You notice there isn't much between inside and outside. A wooden door, a basic latch, maybe a bar. Not much protection from thieves or wolves, or just that neighbor who likes to talk too loudly. A mother pulls the last pot away from the coals, scraping out something that's more soup than stew. A father mumbles a quick prayer in Latin he doesn't fully understand, crossing himself. Kids yawn dramatically, the universal child signal that they are absolutely exhausted and yet somehow still not ready to lie down. Sleep isn't a private, personal, luxurious thing. It's just the practical end of the day, done in the same space where everything else happens. Out in the wider town, a few lanterns bob through the gloom. Night watchmen doing their slow patrol. They carry wooden staves or spears, and one of them rattles a door just to make sure it's bolted. In some bigger towns, a bell might have rung earlier to mark curfew. From the French cover feu, literally, cover fire. It's a real order: bank your hearth, put out candles, get inside. A mainstream historical fact you can hold onto by the later Middle Ages. In many European towns, nightlife is not a thing. The law expects you to be off the streets after dark unless you have a very good reason. You walk past the church, a hulking dark shape that looms over the town even when you can't see it clearly. Its bell tower is a black cutout against the sky. Earlier, that bell helped everyone tell time. The last ringing in the evening, the marker that the day is officially done. Time here isn't buzzing constantly from screens. It's doled out in chunks by bells: morning, noon, evening, night. Between those sounds, people rely on the sun in their own bodies to guess the hours. Historians still argue whether people were really obsessed with precise time or just used these rough signals and shrugged at the rest. As you drift on, past houses and small shops shuttered for the night, you start to notice how loud the silence is. There's no hum of traffic, no fridge cycling on and off, no distant sirens. Instead, you pick up tiny sounds: wooden beams creaking as they cool, an owl calling from a thatched roof, The faint murmur of a couple arguing softly through thin walls. People are closer together physically, but privacy is almost non-existent. You pass a wealthier home, a merchant's house, larger and better built. Light seeps out around the shutters, a warmer, steadier glow than a single tallow candle in a poor cottage. Maybe they can afford beeswax. Brighter, cleaner, and much more expensive. You smell the faint honeyed sweetness of it, almost shocking compared to the greasy, smoky smell of animal fat candles. Inside, the family stays up a little later, counting coins, talking business, maybe gossiping about politics. The poor go to bed earlier because fuel costs money and there's nothing else to do. Richer folks stretch the evening with extra light, almost like they're buying more time. You slide past their guarded gate and into a small courtyard. There's a well, a shed, maybe a pile of firewood. Above you on the second floor, a larger bed is waiting. Even for the well-off, this bed is more about function than fluff. A wooden frame with ropes crisscrossing under a mattress stuffed with straw, wool, or feathers if they're really doing well. Someone might have engraved a little cross into the headboard, half decoration, half spiritual insurance. One of the more curious, fringe tidbits from this world, some people hang little charms or herbs by the bed. Sprigs of rue, St. John's wort, or other plants thought to chase away nightmares, demons, or just bad air. They don't separate spiritual fears from physical ones very clearly. If something helps you sleep, it might be medicine, magic, or a bit of both. Historians still argue whether these practices were mainly superstition or carried kernels of real herbal knowledge, wrapped in religious tradition. You move beyond town now, out into the countryside where darkness feels even thicker. Farmhouses sit alone or in small clusters, dim shapes in the fields. In a small peasant hut, a family has already crawled into their shared sleeping space. The door is barred, more out of habit than hope. If someone truly wants in, the door isn't stopping them. A dog lies right up against the threshold, the medieval version of an alarm system, hopefully cheaper and with fewer subscription fees. Inside, the layout is brutally simple: animals on one side, humans on the other in some households, especially in the colder regions. A cow's slow, steady breath warms the space almost as much as the embers in the hearth. You wrinkle your nose at the smell and then soften. If you lived here, you'd decide pretty fast that warmth beats fresh air. You'd also learn to sleep through sounds that would completely freak you out now. Snorting, shifting hooves, maybe a chicken complaining in its sleep. You pause and listen as the whole countryside inhales and exhales. This is sleepless in the Middle Ages. Not insomnia in the modern sense, but a world where sleep is both necessary and fragile. One storm can bring down your roof. One cough that doesn't go away can turn into something much worse. One bad harvest makes the body thinner, more vulnerable to cold and exhaustion. People sleep out of real physical need, they carry tiredness like an extra cloak. Yet the night is never just peaceful. It's packed with meaning. The dark hours are when ghosts wander, when the devil supposedly prowls, when saints drop in through your dreams, and when your house might catch on fire while you breathe too deeply to notice. Ordinary people talk about night with a mixture of boredom and dread, like it's both the dullest and the most dangerous part of the day. As you move from house to house, from hut to hall, you notice a pattern. Everyone tries to control the dark in some tiny way. A candle by the bed, a prayer whispered before lying down, a charm tucked under a pillow, curtains or bed hangings drawn close, turning a bed into a little fort against the world. Even in the simplest cottage, someone has tried something, anything, to make this long stretch of darkness feel less enormous. And you, drifting unnoticed through all of this, start to feel the weight of that darkness too. Your modern eyes search automatically for a switch to flip, a screen to light up, but there's nothing. Just you. Your thoughts, the hiss of cooling stones in the hearth, and the slow heartbeat of a world that has no choice but to surrender to the night. Somewhere, a distant bell rings again, marking an hour you can't quite count. For some, it's the signal to turn over and sink deeper into straw. For others, in monasteries and churches, it's a call to get up. You're standing on the threshold between waking and sleeping, between fear and rest, and the night is just getting started. You stir where you stand, the echo of that monastery bell still rolling through the dark air. It's strange. How in this world, the rhythm of sleep bends and folds around time itself. You may think of sleep as one long block of unconsciousness, the clean chunk between bedtime and alarm clock. But here, In the dim wooden rooms of the Middle Ages, people don't sleep straight through. They split the night in half because that's what night seems built for. This rhythm has a name historians like segmented sleep. You bed down early, sometimes soon after sunset for your first sleep. Then, sometime around midnight, you stir naturally, blink against the dark, and rise for a couple of hours before slipping back for a second sleep. People in the Middle Ages take this break for granted. They think it's how the body works. You wake up, not panicked, but reflect you've charged the first half of your sleep battery, and now you're stretching quietly before plugging in the other half. You hover beside a family as they stir into their midnight intermission. The father rubs his face, pulling his cap back on. The mother pushes aside wool blankets and stirs the ashes in the hearth until a few sparks bloom. It's not glamorous, but the tiniest flame can change everything. The room glows soft orange again, full of shadow and comfort. Someone yawns wide enough to sound like a sigh, and then quietly they start talking. First sleep is practical, second sleep is sacred. In between, you've got this silent, in-between world where chores get finished, prayers get said, and babies get fed. Think of it as medieval me time, minus the coffee. Some people even visit neighbors if the lanes are safe, clutching a candle stub to navigate the cold. Mostly, though, it's reflective time, somewhere between conscious thought and dream haze. As you watch, the father mutters through a short prayer to his patron saint, low and rhythmic, a chant half for faith, half for comfort. The mother quietly kneads dough left to rise from the evening, shaping small loaves that will be baked when dawn returns. The older child, hair sticking up like straw, draws pictures in the ashes with a stick, tiny ships and suns that no one will see when the coals collapse. It's a surprisingly peaceful sight, a family half awake, half dreaming, just existing in the stillness. Historians still argue whether this two sleeps pattern was universal across Europe or just common in northern latitudes where nights stretch longest. Some claim diaries and letters from as late as the 17th century mention first sleep and second sleep as if they were normal. Others think only certain communities embraced it, while others slept more continuously depending on work patterns, seasons, or social class. The truth, as usual, seems to float somewhere in the middle, like someone dozing with one eye open. Midnight itself, though, has its own strange magnetism. People believe the hours around it are charged with mystery. The halfway mark between day and dawn feels like a thin veil hour, when spirits wander and prayers pierce heaven faster. Monks have a name for this, the vigils. They rise intentionally at midnight to chant in candlelight, their voices threading through thick stone corridors and chairs that echo like dreams. If you follow that sound, you find the great Abbey Tower looming against starlight, its windows flickering gold. You move closer. Inside, rows of monks kneel in the chair stalls, robbed figures lit from below by small lamps. They chant from memory, slow and deep and strangely hypnotic. The temperature never seems to rise, yet their voices warm the air. For them, waking at midnight isn't a disturbance, it's devotion. They believe night is sacred, its silence perfect for conversation with God. The human body tires and drowses, but the soul, they say, can stay vigilant if trained properly. You drift out again, leaving the sound behind, and find yourself outside another household. This one belongs to a merchant's apprentice. He lies awake beside his snoring master, eyes on the rafters, replaying the day's troubles, the account ledgers that didn't add up, the anxious desire to do better. People in this age interpret sleepless thoughts as something spiritual, not medical. Perhaps an angel nudging you toward repentance. Perhaps you've sinned and need forgiveness. Maybe it's just bad stew, but medieval minds prefer meaning over digestion. He sighs and gets up, tiptoeing to the small table in the corner. There a jug of ale waits, flat but still comforting. He takes a gulp, swishes it, and sits by the single window. Outside, moonlight presses through like pale water. For a strange second, the town looks silvered and still, as though frozen in glass. The apprentice thinks of home, his mother's voice, the shape of her hands kneading dough just like that other woman earlier. Sleep will come again soon. But first, this quiet hour feels like stepping outside of time. You probably know this feeling yourself. The odd wake up at 3 in the morning when your mind starts listing everything you've ever messed up since 4th grade. Except here, that wake up is expected. The difference is no blue light buzzing in your face, no phone to doom scroll. Just starlight, the sound of one's own breathing. And maybe the rustle of a mouse enjoying a midnight snack? It's anxiety softened by habit. The pause between two halves of rest. In noble houses, midnight looks different. You make your way into a large manor. Thicker beams, better floors, finer blankets. The master of the house has servants sleeping near the door, like loyal cats half hiding beneath benches. He lies under layers of wool and fur, but somewhere between dreaming of trade privileges and hunting trips, he wakes up. Someone notices and brings him watered wine. Maybe he calls for company, reading aloud from a psalter or talking politics. These interludes can feel like mini meetings wedged inside the night. Imagine scheduling work calls between two naps. Efficient in theory, absurd in practice. Across the manor hall, a servant girl sits near the embers, mending lines by touch memory more than sight. Her needle glints occasionally in the dim light. She is half awake but steady, trying to finish stitches before morning chores. For a fleeting moment, she hums softly, an old folk tune learned from her mother. A melody without words, the kind that comforts you even when you don't remember the lyrics. You wonder if she knows this hour belongs to the world half dreaming around her, that she's part of a vast unseen rhythm, a village breathing in unison. You take a step closer and feel the pulse of that rhythm everywhere in quiet calls through walls, distant bells, a dog's restless shuffle. Night here feels alive, its silence thick and textured like wool. It's not stillness, it's slow motion life. Then, like turning a page, the quiet starts to fold back down. The family you watched earlier has finished their bread dough and prayers. They crawl under blankets again, bodies curling inward against the chill. In small towns, others do the same, one by one. If you could hover above the region, you'd see flickers of firelight going dark across the patchwork land, like embers winking out after a feast. You lean into that darkness and something deeply human in it. Sleep here isn't just physical, it's social. The first sleep ends when bodies ache less, the second begins after fears have been soothed, chores done, sins confessed, bellies filled. This separation feels a little more aware, as though medieval people build their nights like two small houses instead of one big one, the first for fatigue, the second for surrender. Modern science, astonishingly, hints they might have been onto something. Without artificial light, our bodies do tend to drift towards segmented rest cycles, a relic of natural circadian rhythms. Left in pure darkness for weeks, people today often find themselves waking after 4 or 5 hours, staying peacefully alert for an hour or two, then sleeping again. Maybe you'd discover the same if your nights stretched long enough and your world got genuinely quiet. But don't get too comfortable with the thought. The night isn't harmless. You feel the prickle of wind slipping through a cracked shutter and hear something move upstairs, a soft thud, then another. In a world without streetlights, that sound can turn quickly into a story people whisper the next morning: angels walking, thieves prowling, witches slipping through keyholes. The human imagination fills the dark like smoke. You slip away before whoever, or whatever it is, decides to come downstairs. In the open air again, the stars are fading slightly, signs of dawn a few hours off. Some candles burn low, others still glow strong. The air holds traces of smoke and sleep, bread dough and wool, mutters and dreams. And somewhere inside every house, the same pattern continues: one part sleep, one part wake, one part reason to believe the night itself is a living thing keeping you company. Morning flickers faintly at the edge of the world, but you're still wandering through half dreams, sliding from shadow to shadow. The smell changes first, damp earth lightens, and somewhere, someone pokes a stick into the fire to coax out dawn. You step inside one of those cottages again, the one with smoke stains on the ceiling. Now your eyes adjust to details you missed last time. There it is, the medieval bed, or the messy, itchy, straw-stuffed version of it. And it's not quite the cozy image you might get from storybooks. A mattress, if you can call it that, sits as a sack filled with straw, reeds, or, if luck smiles on you, dried rushes. Every few weeks you'd shake it out and restuff it because the contents rot, smell, and crawl with tiny, unwelcome roommates. This pallet rests on the floor or low planks. A single linen sheet covers it, roughened from washing in lye soap and air drying in smoke. You press your hand down and it crunches faintly, full of air and dry stems, like sleeping on a bakery of straw crackers. And then you realize something strikingly obvious. Not all beds are born equal. The medieval mattress quietly announces your wealth. If you have a feather bed, sturdy ticking cloth filled with goose or duck feathers, then congratulations, you belong to the 1% of the Middle Ages. You probably also have servants to beat and fluff it daily using long sticks so the feathers don't clump. That's how the rich literally end the day softer. Across a single village, nighttime becomes a layered metaphor of class. In one cottage, a peasant family's mat lies directly on the floor, smelling faintly of barn and human sweat. In another, a merchant family sleeps on wooden frames with crisscrossed ropes beneath the mattress. Too loose and you sag, too tight and it squeaks with every roll. Medieval sleep ergonomics at its finest. Then again, historians still argue whether rope beds were as comfortable as the richer feather platforms or just functionally annoying status symbols. You lean against a wall, eyes wandering over the rest of the room. This bed doubles as dining bench, child playground, and sometimes sick ward. There's no bedroom. In most homes, the single multipurpose space holds everything. A thin wool curtain might separate the parents from kids, but sound goes through unhindered. Privacy, like a feather pillow, is a luxury item. But somewhere deeper in town, behind stone walls and guarded gates, the contrast turns theatrical. You float upward, through high windows trimmed with stained glass, into a noble's solar chamber. The medieval equivalent of an upstairs lounge and sleeping space combined. The walls glow faintly golden from candles, and a bed dominates the room like royalty in wood form. Massive carved posts rise from the corners, and rich tapestry hangings surround the mattress to hold in precious warmth. The curtains also hide your sleeping face from prying servants or, more practically, shield you from night drafts sneaking through windows. The cloth is dyed deep crimson, shimmering under low light. The mattress bulges like a loaf of bread. It's packed with wool, feathers, and even scented herbs. Someone has sprinkled lavender and sweet rushes between the sheets. For a moment, you breathe it in and nearly forgive the rest of medieval hygiene. The bed becomes a sensory island in a world of dirt and noise. Servants move quietly. One folds the Lord's outer garments, another adjusts the embers near the hearth. You realize that even sleep operates on a hierarchy. The Lord lies soft and perfumed. The servant curls by the warm wall, wrapped in an old cloak. And if both dream of the same thing, say a feast or warm sunrise, only one wakes to find any chance of it real. You shift back toward the common folk. A group of laborers finishes their second sleep, rising stiffly from straw mats. They complain about aching backs and flattened stuffing, which is the medieval way of saying, this mattress needs replacing. One man shakes out the bedding and fetches fresh straw from the barn. Clouds of dust swirl, catching the slanted sunlight through the open door. You sneeze and can almost taste the hay on your tongue. To keep those sacks of straw from turning into a house party for lice and fleas, people add dried herbs or lay aromatic plants beneath the bedding. Mint, wormwood, or tansy. Supposedly it repels pests, though the pests never received that memo. Still, it smells better than nothing, and that counts for a lot here. Beds, like people, need a bit of deception to appear fresh. Later, in warmer months, some folks haul bedding outside to air. You picture an entire village on washing day, linen sheets flapping like sails between fences, a straw sack split open to dry in the sun. Chickens peck curiously at the scattered bits, dogs roll on them with blissful confusion. And suddenly the whole yard smells faintly better. It's rustic, sure, but practical. Of course, even the noblest mattress can become a nightmare. Without real cleaning agents, parasites thrive. Fleas jump joyously from blankets, spreading the same diseases that later unsettle entire towns. You scratch your wrist unconsciously, as though one might have hitched a ride through the centuries. You can't help but joke. Medieval thread count 1% linen, 99% wildlife? Still, these same people believe their beds could heal. Old medical texts recommend specific materials for certain temperaments. A body of hot and dry humor should lie on linen soaked in cool herbs. Choleric person should sleep under light covers to vent excess fire. Doctors prescribe rest as cure, claiming that different mattress fillings balance the inner elements. Historians still argue whether these so-called humor therapies had any physiological basis, or just offered something comforting to believe before germ theory existed. You wander into a small carpenter's shop where bed frames stand half-finished. The craftsman sands a board, humming through sawdust. He mutters that a good bed must outlast generations. Solid oak posts, peg joints carved initials. He even builds hidden drawers under one, a secret space for coins or holy relics. To sleep above your valuables feels strategic, to wake and find them gone feels very medieval. Sometimes, these frames turn into Harlems, passed down as family symbols. One record even mentions a farmer leaving his bedstead to his son in a will, alongside the plow, equal tools of living and resting. You imagine signing your inheritance today and noticing? Grandmother's mattress, listed proudly, complete with an affectionate note about the firm straw support. Romantic, if you ignore the realism. The sun climbs higher now, illuminating the divide between comfort and crawl space. A noble woman stretches under embroidered sheets, rings flashing briefly before she tugs the curtains shut again. Across town, a baker's apprentice rubs his eyes, limbs stiff, then rolls off a pile of bundled rags. Both are waking into the same winter light, but their nights couldn't be more different. Here's the thing that always catches you despite the roughness: most people still sleep. They grumble, adjust, scratch, and dream anyway. Human adaptability is stronger than mattresses or marble floors. The body finds its way to rest, whether pressed against straw or lying under silk canopy. Everyone folds into the same shape of fatigue at day's end. You pause near an open window, feeling the soft morning cold wash through. Behind you, sheets whisper as someone shakes them clean of crumbs and memories. You realize how little changes in essence. Every age, every bed, every sleeper chases the same uncomplicated goal: a few silent hours away from worry. And maybe tomorrow, after another fire, another prayer, another night split by mild miracles, someone will lie down again and think briefly, before drifting off, that their world feels just comfortable enough. The morning haze has barely lifted before you find yourself drawn toward the darker corners again, the ones that only make sense when the light fades. You want to know what happens at night when the peace breaks? When something goes wrong in all that quiet. If there's one thing universal through centuries, it's the emergency stumble to the bathroom, or in this case, to a bucket that doesn't deserve the name bathroom. You're back in a narrow medieval hallway, half awake and barefoot, following a groggy man in a long shirt as he tries not to trip over a wooden stool. He's clutching a candle stub that flickers dangerously every time he breathes. What he's heading for sits in the corner of the chamber pot, a glorified bowl with a handle, half hidden behind a curtain or under the bed. Indoor plumbing, not yet. The rich might have a closed stool, a kind of wooden chair with a hole in it, lined with a removable pot. A fragile luxury, really? Half convenience, half trap if someone forgets to empty it. The poor, meanwhile, might step outside, heart hammering, a praying nothing beady-eyed watches from the dark. It's hard not to smirk watching this nightly ritual play out. You, the invisible observer, hear every creak of floorboard, every muttered curse as the cold air hits. The candle sputters even lower, sending shadows leaping like nervous cats up the wall. And right here, in this perfectly ordinary moment of human frailty, you realize, nights were noisy, every house ticked inside. Wind yowled through uneven planks, mice scuttled in the straw, owls hunted with shrieks sharp as knaves against the silence. No wonder people whispered about spirits. When all light vanishes and everything still moves, the imagination does cartwheels. Historians still argue whether people truly believed every nighttime sound had supernatural roots, or whether they simply lacked better explanations. Either way, they lived with fear close enough to touch. A thought from the next room sends the man's candle jumping. He freezes. Maybe a rat. Maybe not. It's easy to laugh now. The guarded by your double-locked doors and night lights, but back then, stepping into pitch darkness felt like volunteering for a ghost story. And medieval Europe had plenty of those. You follow him to the window slit. Beyond, the village slumbers under a milky fog. The moon, small and exact, glints off roof tiles slick with mist. Somewhere down the lane, a dog barks again. 3 short, angry bursts. The man mutters a prayer to stave off nightwalkers. A catch-all name for ghosts, demons, or thieves. They all look similar when your candle's dying. In cities, the dark pressed even heavier. Imagine London or Paris before streetlights, narrow lanes, no moon, just the random orange bloom of a tavern still open. Leaking laughter into blackness? Curfews meant decent folk were inside. Those who walked outside after the bell were drunks, watchmen, or criminals, or curious travelers who might end up regretting it. You step into one such alley, the mud cold against invisible feet. Even the rats pause to listen when boots echo too sharply. One of the watchmen swings his lantern low, its light revealing handprints of soot on the wall. He peers upward. Hearing a noise, the lantern shifts again, grazing the wet shimmer of glass from a nearby window. Inside, a family hides quietly. Everyone's both afraid and complicit in keeping the peace of the night intact. Rarely do you see a world so collectively tense at bedtime. But not all danger comes from outside. Fire, as usual, stalks closer to home. You drift back to a merchant's house where the remains of a hearth still crackle. The wife checks the coals last thing before lying down. A rule so ingrained it carries the same weight as prayer. She banks the ashes, spreading them to smother the flame. A cover few, cover the fire. That's where the word curfew comes from. If you forget, you risk the blaze jumping free and eating your entire livelihood before the rooster crows. The irony, of course, is that while everyone fears hellfire as divine punishment, an earthly version takes about 3 minutes to begin right in their kitchen. Records are full of towns lost overnight because someone left a candle near the thatch. Fire was warmth, status, safety, and hazard rolled together. The usual bedtime ritual had a strange tenderness, each house carefully dimming itself into darkness, neighbors listening for the sound of each other's last shutter thumping into place. You notice that between danger and superstition, nights here demand choreography. Someone does his flame, someone locks the outer door, someone utters charms around the threshold. A mother might whisper, "Guard us, Saint Martha," from sudden fright. A father might trace a cross on the woodwork. The children peek nervously at rafters where legends say goblins crouch. And outside, a cold wind sneaks through the thatch joints anyway, whistling like laughter. A fun, if slightly uncomfortable tidbit, archaeologists have found witch bottles buried near old entrances. Glass or clay containers filled with nails, hair, and urine. People believed they trapped evil spirits trying to sneak indoors at night. So if you're wondering how anxious medieval households were, consider that their version of home security combined plumbing and sorcery. You drift higher, over rooftops, and spot a solitary cottage sitting at the very edge of the woods. That's always where fear congregates. Inside, a widow sits awake, her candle burning low. She can't sleep. Owls are calling again, and her imagination does what human minds always do. It fills silence with meaning. Maybe she hears her husband's ghost in the wind. Maybe she hears a wolf. The dog lifts its head, ears twitching, then settles again. She shakes the blanket higher around her shoulders and breathes in straw and smoke. The breathing fills the room, turning fear into rhythm. The night sprawls on, and so do the people's defenses, prayers, charms, ritual actions. One man sets his sword by the bed, just in case. Another keeps shoes turned facing the door to confuse malicious spirits, or so rumor insists. Folk wisdom says if death comes calling, it gets distracted trying to put them on. That's one way to buy a few more minutes of sleep. And yet, despite the tension, despite the constant readiness for danger, people still rest, maybe because exhaustion always wins. You spot a laborer's wife slump sideways mid-sentence, candle falling dark. She survived another day of fear and noise. Her husband snores instantly, still gripping the cross pendant around his neck. The candle smolders untouched, a faint curl of smoke rising toward the rafters. The house holds its breath, waiting to see if it might catch fire or drift peacefully until morning. Outside, frost forms tiny crystals on every surface. The moon starts tipping westward. Whatever monsters lived in the dark retreat toward the trees, losing interest in the fragile glow of humankind. And in that sighing lull, you realize the terror and the tiredness belong together. The people of this age never fully conquer night, they bargain with it. Maybe that's why their rituals seem strange to you now. Faith forever arguing with fear, both trying to share the blanket. One last noise breaks the hush, the faint splash of water from the chamber pot, then quiet again. The air smells faintly of smoke and ammonia, same as it always does, but now it just feels ordinary. You smile to yourself. Every generation has its night problems, and most sound small when morning finally comes. You wake each day with the faint must of wool in your nose, because in the Middle Ages, sleep smells like fabric that never quite dries. In a cottage this small, the air never empties completely of yesterday. Smoke lingers in the fibers of your tunic, sweat hides in your sleeves. And when night rolls back around again, you don't change for bed. You climb straight into it the way you are, boots off, cap on. Everything else still clinging to you like a second skin. People of your time might call it grim. They'd stand in the doorway asking questions like, "Wait, you slept in your clothes." But for medieval folk, sleeping dressed makes sense. It's part of the rhythm, part of surviving. There's no heating except the hearth. The cold seeps up through the floorboards and takes root in your bones. Sleep naked here, and you're basically volunteering to turn into a popsicle before dawn. A tunic, linen shift, or chemis acts as your blanket's first line of defense against grime, too. Most people own only a couple of sets of clothes. The nightshirt, as a category, doesn't really exist yet, at least not outside monasteries and among the wealthy who invent distinctions because they can. What you wear during the day often becomes what you sleep in. There's a simplicity in it, the same utilitarian logic that says, don't wash what you can just air out. You lift the edge of a blanket in one house and notice the familiar layering system. A coarse linen sheet over straw ticking, maybe a woolen blanket or two on top, and, if it's winter, a cloak added for good measure. The air smells slightly of lanolin, that waxy sheep scent trapped in wool. If you're lucky enough to have furs, they go closest to the body. Nothing holds warmth like the remnants of another creature. And yes, occasionally those furs still come with fleas included. Think of them as rental guests rather than owners. Historians still argue whether attitudes toward hygiene were truly as bleak as we imagine or just misunderstood through later exaggeration. It's clear that bathing wasn't absent, it was just different. People did wash, but full submersion in water carried risks. It could open pores, to sickness or lead to stiffness from the cold, according to Galenic theory. So small-scale washing sufficed in wiping hands, rinsing faces, cleaning feet, and changing linen when possible. The idea of being squeaky clean would come centuries later, just like Wi-Fi. In this world, clothes while sleeping serve both as blanket and armor. You think about how it changes intimacy too. New leads or even long married couples rarely share the modern experience of falling asleep skin on skin. There's always a shift between you and another person, a sleepy textile curtain that muffles the warmth of touch. But maybe that's part of its gentleness. The world builds in limits, turning private life into layers, not exposures. You wander into a grander house, a merchant family just before bedtime. The father sits in a thick wool gown, drinking something that looks like watered wine. His wife wears a long, hooded night robe lined with fur at the sleeves, a luxury that says, we can afford to be warm. On the hearth sits a beautifully carved chest. She opens it to reveal extra lines folded carefully, among them a small sachet of dried roses and cloves to perfume the cloth. The fragrances mask body odor and smoke. They become the medieval version of fabric softener. When she finally turns down her bed, you realize the layered ritual extends to behavior. She removes the outer gown but keeps the undergarment, the soft lion chemis. Even her hair is carefully wrapped to stay neat through sleep. Nearby parchments show sketches of similar routines among the upper classes. Stages of undressing mapped like ceremony. Medieval people, even the rich ones, see sleep as both necessity and moral act. Too much indulgent comfort might signal spiritual weakness. Some clergy warn against idleness in bed, meaning both oversleeping and other pursuits. You head toward a monastery for contrast. Inside, stone corridors breathe chill even in summer. A candle slumps low on its plate, suggesting another hour's silence before a bell calls the brothers to their next office. In their dormitory, 40 monks lied by side in narrow wooden stalls, fully clothed in wool robes, hoods pulled up. Beds, simple boards topped with mats, blankets, rough gray stuff fit for keeping you humble. They believe warmth invites sin. The body should never get too comfortable, lest it dream the wrong kind of dreams. One monk shifts, barely audible, reciting a fragment of prayer even as he falls asleep. That's dedication or self-inflicted insomnia. Back among ordinary villagers, fashion takes creative turns in winter. People sleep wearing hats, yes, literal nightcaps. The same style later immortalized in fairy tale drawings actually began as practical insulation. Keep the head warm, keep the rest alive. Socks or wool wraps around feet double the effect. And because most homes leak air through every crevice, sleepers cling together for additional heat. Families pile in like nesting dolls, each layer of cloth pressed between layers of kin. You can't help but imagine the smell. A kindly mix of smoked bodies, wool, and faint vinegar where someone cleaned a wound. It's not pleasant but strangely grounding, the olfactory equivalent of living history. Modern comfort would ruin this entire dance. Warmth would separate people, not unite them. Here's a fringe tidbit that slips into folklore territory. Some believed sleeping fully dressed protected you from night spirits. If your skin was covered, the devil or the nightmare couldn't sit directly on your chest to suffocate you. It's half superstition, half excuse to keep the blanket tucked higher, and when someone actually did wake up gasping, likely experiencing sleep paralysis. People nodded wisely, proof the mare had been repelled, or not repelled enough. You follow a shepherd into the fields after sunset. He beds down alone under a rough cloak made from a sheep's hide, head resting on a sack. It's damp and lonely, but the cloak smells of the animals that keep him alive. Above, cold stars pulse over the moors. He doesn't complain, he mutters a psalm, pulls the cloak tighter, and lets the earth's chill become part of him. For a world anchored to land and weather, comfort always lives inside obedience to faith, to seasons, to need. It's somewhere between funny and tragic. The same villagers who pray to repel fleas would also say it's sinful to crave silk sheets. Comfort means weakness, hardship means virtue. And still, you catch them experimenting, stuffing their pillows with years-old feathers, lining their shifts with scraps of worn fur, folding spare sacks around their straw piles to make bedding sandwiches. It's ingenuity born of exhaustion. A candle flickers out nearby, thin smoke coiling upward until the dark swallows it whole. You crouch by its dying wick, hearing the faint sighs of the sleeping room. Someone snores, someone murmurs your name, or maybe just the name of their cow. A baby fusses briefly, easily soothed. For once, you don't mind the smell or the itch of wool. It feels almost safe, and you realize that inside every scratchy blanket, every patched tunic or fur-lined nightrobe, people dream the same way they always have, carrying daylight worries into the dark, hoping morning will look a little warmer. Sleep, fully dressed or not, remains humanity's quietest rebellion against its own discomfort. You step outside into the medieval dusk again. Bells hum in the distance, low and heavy, shaking the air like thunder stitched with faith. You've heard this sound before, but tonight it's clearer, more insistent. It's the church calling, and even your yawn doesn't escape its rhythm. In this world, religion doesn't just rule your soul, it dictates your bedtime. Every village, every town, every walled citadel breathes in time with bells. When the evening one tolls, the Ave Maria or Compline bell, you know what it means: stop working, put out fires, lock your doors, and kneel for prayers. It's less an invitation and more a command handed down from heaven with perfect acoustics. You can almost imagine the sound crossing fields, bouncing off stone barns, rolling through valleys of mist, telling thousands at once, sleep now, but reverently. You walk through narrow alleys as villagers respond. A pair of weavers put away their tools, murmuring tired Latin they only half understand. A baker glances at the church tower like he's checking a clock, but this is the clock. Time flows from faith, not machinery. Even in bed, you sleep according to scripture, your rest measured between prayers. Historians still argue whether this constant religiosity shaped people's inner calm or their lifelong anxiety. Maybe both. When every chime reminds you of mortality and judgment, bedtime feels less like relaxation and more like rehearsal for eternity. Yet, that regularity also offers comfort. The darkness doesn't feel so wild when you believe it's choreographed from above. In a monastery, the pattern is even stricter. You pass through tall oak doors into a long dormitory lined with narrow cots. Each monk lies beneath a wool blanket, hands folded as though already in vigil. No small talk, no laughter, just the hum of 50 synchronized breaths. Then the bell again, it's midnight, the vigil. One monk sighs, pulls on sandals, and leads the procession toward the chapel. Their footsteps scrape stone, the air tastes like candle wax. Inside, the glow from the altar flickers softly against carved saints. They chant psalms in long, low waves, voices pulsing through arches. They've charted this schedule so precisely that their sleep happens between holy interruptions, compline at night, matins at midnight, lauds at dawn. Regular people might find this mad, but to the monks, it's sanity, the architecture of devotion carved into time itself. You follow them back to their cots hours later. They lie down again without question, proving what might be the most medieval truth of all you: obedience is its own lullaby. There's something hypnotic in the repetition. They believe each breath taken under rule keeps chaos outside the walls. Out beyond those walls, the rules ripple outward, shaping villages. You wander among them, listening to domesticated sleep. Peasants mimic monastic order unconsciously. Families kneel beside straw beds, reciting Pater Noster, quies and colas. Parents cross their children's foreheads, a nightly antivirus against sin or sudden death. The youngest mumble fragments of rhyme that sound almost pagan, remnants of older centuries tucked secretly beneath Christian words. Here, faith weaves ancient and new into one quilt of belief. You pause beside a widow finishing her rosary. When she whispers amen, she spits on the floor. A small superstition sneaked between holy phrases to confuse any lurking demon. Religion and magic exist side by side, half rebels, half allies. She rises, stretches her fingers, and banks her fire under the sign of the cross. The flame bows low, obedient, as if she's blessing the very concept of warmth. In wealthier homes, religion performs on stage. You find a noble's chamber again, perfumed and plush. But before anyone dares crawl between the velvet curtains, a priest might appear for evening benediction. The servant boys kneel in a line, yawning discreetly, while the Lord and Lady repeat verses about cleansing the spirit of nightly temptation. Sleep here isn't private. It's a moral performance wrapped in silk and Latin. You catch a quieter moment with that same Lord later. He kneels alone now, ringed hands clasped tight. Despite the luxury, his prayer sounds desperate, a rhythm so old it could come from any century. Keep me safe this night from devil, fire, and evil dream. He means it. Beneath all status hum the same fears. From outside, the church bell tolls again, softer, its echo sliding through every open window. It's the sound that replaces silence. Bells divide the night the way breathing divides life, with pauses meant to remind you you're still human, still temporary. You drift toward the church itself, glide above the spire, and settle onto the cold stones near the roofline. Below, the priest finishes locking the heavy door. He too will sleep eventually, wrapped in his own prayers. But for now he stops, glancing toward a single candle still burning at Mary's statue. It isn't supposed to be left unsupervised, but faith sometimes looks like risk with better branding. You can almost hear his inner argument. Safer to let divine light burn than to snuff holiness. He chooses faith. You imagine the insurance rates. If you listen closely, you can hear faith everywhere, the murmur of lullabies reciting psalms, the rhythmic sigh of a monk reciting verses in his sleep, even the church mice gnawing in tempo with the liturgical calendar. Everyone schedules their rest around worship, like the divine moon itself manages bedtime. There's tenderness hidden there. The same bell that tells you to stop working also tells you you've done enough. You can finally rest, not because the chores are done, but because time, as the church defines it, demands a pause. For a brief moment, obedience becomes mercy. You glide along the high stone parapet looking down at the scattered pools of lamplight below, one in every cottage, fading at different speeds. The rhythm is communal: bell, prayer, sleep, bell again. Even thieves hesitate when the second compliant bell rings too late. Sin feels harder when holiness just announced its curfew. As clouds drift past the moon, something shifts inside you. You realize this precision. These bells that bar the night helped invent a strange new concept. Society learned to coordinate behavior through sound, an early experiment in shared timekeeping. Centuries later, clocks would inherit the bell tower's authority. But tonight, divine bedtime remains the only order that matters. The night deepens once more, from the monastery to the farthest shepherd's field. The human world quiets exactly as commanded. The bells fade, swallowed by wind. Sleep moves through the land like incense, slow and mandatory. You close your eyes, hearing echoes that sound like heartbeat and hymn blended into one. The clang of the last bell fades into silence, and you realize something the monks and merchants alike already know: every flicker of light left burning is a gamble. Fire isn't just cozy in the Middle Ages, it's alive, temperamental, a moody roommate that sometimes decides to eat the house. You stand inside a timber-framed cottage now, watching its walls breathe with candlelight. The table is rough. The beams overhead are black with soot from decades of smoke. Before bed each night, every person in this house performs the same nervous performance: make sure the flame dies before it decides to seek adventure. You can almost feel their hands hover near the hearth, testing every ember. They call the ritual covering the fire, literally smoothing ashes over coals so the flame can rest in secret until morning. That simple act stands between comfort and catastrophe. A mother whispers a rhyme to remind herself of each task: water for the pot, shutter the window, latch the door, sleep in God's keeping. Nobody's writing bedtime storybooks about that routine, but it's as universal as prayer. A cough rises from the attic, a grandmother who's long since quit worrying about smoky rafters. The smell of charred wood saturates her hair. She swabs her face with a damp cloth and pulls a shawl up to her chin. Houses then always smell faintly burned, as if memory itself were singed into them. There's a curious peace in that. alive only because nothing has burned yet. Rich homes do it differently. You step into one now, boots clicking across tiled floor. A servant carries a long-snouted candle extinguisher, snuffing tapers one by one before retreating with shaking hands. A single ember dropped in the wrong place could end employment, lives, and dowries all in one night. Somewhere above, tapestries sway slightly in a draft, ready kindling disguised as art. The master walks through the final room, double-checking shutters against sparks. His perfumed cloak brushes a candelabra, and for a terrifying instant, the flame kisses the fabric. He jerks away, mutters a curse that he quickly transforms into a prayer, and presses the wick flat with trembling fingers. Disaster averted by reflex and adrenaline. He laughs once, quietly, the sound of someone who knows how close he just came to waking the whole town in the worst way. Historians still argue whether people were as fire paranoid as we imagine or simply realistic. After all, even stone castles burned, especially the roofs, which were timber and thatch. Entire neighborhoods vanished in single blazes recorded only as the great misfortune of, in fragile town ledgers. Most nights ended peacefully, but always beneath the quiet drumbeat of potential disaster. Sleep was an act of trusting. You closed your eyes, believing your house would still be standing when you opened them. You drift over streets that glimmer with a dim orange haze. Smoke from hundreds of weaves itself upward like evening incense. The city below resembles a living organism, its glowing cores pulsing softly at thousands of chimneys. Beautiful, almost holy, until you remember each flicker could become tragedy. One household refuses to risk it at all. Their hearth sits dark, cold as clay. They've banked not just their fire, but their comfort. The father tells his children that warmth is for heaven, caution is for earth. The youngest still rubs her hands together for imagined heat before curling up. The ironing, in protecting themselves from fire, they invite cold to gnaw at them all night. There's no winning this age, only choosing what hurts less. Half a mile away, in a tavern's upper room, a different danger hums quietly. A drunk merchant staggers toward his bed, candle still burning. He places it on a shelf, too close to curtain cloth, and collapses with a heroic snore. You already know where this scene could go. The candle burns shorter, wax puddling like tears. For now, a draft through the window blows it out before the worst can happen. Luck masquerading as grace. Outside, you wander past blackened ruins at town's edge, learning how fast luck runs out. A main beam juts upward like the rib of some dead creature. People whisper that the blaze started when someone fell asleep mid-story, the flame chasing the words themselves. There's a smell here that never leaves, part ash, a part sorrow, something you taste in the back of your throat. Still, even in ruin, they rebuild, and always with the same pattern hearth in the center, beds around it, smoke hole above. How human to class the very thing that can kill you and call it home. You feel a strange admiration in that. Sleep here has always been shared with danger. Maybe that's why people pray before bed. It's half gratitude, half insurance policy. A lesser-known tidbit some towns employed, vigils ignis, or fire watchers. They patrolled dark streets, sniffing the air for smoke, occasionally banging on doors to shout, "Your roof!" before it became a glow. A medieval neighborhood alarm system powered entirely by lungs and paranoia. Only certain big cities could afford them, though. Everywhere else you were on your own. You crossed the fields to a manor house perched above the village, its high windows murmuring light. Inside, a servant trembles as she carries a tray of still burning candles toward the storeroom. At this late hour, flame storage becomes an art form. Cover wicks, hang snuffers, whisper small prayers that the fire behaves. She sets everything neatly, but curiosity makes her pause. One candle she allows to keep glowing, hidden inside a clay lantern. Tomorrow, before dawn, she'll use it to relight the master's hearth. Fire, after all, is cumbersome to begin from scratch. There's memory locked in every ember, an ancient lineage back to Prometheus. When she finally lies down, the hush feels enormous. Her small bravery, the illicit glow in the corner, becomes your world's whole heartbeat. The flame wobbles, stretches, and steadies again. That light will make breakfast possible, will warm wash water, will scare away the cold. It's a living thing she's vowed to watch. And in that glow, you notice her face soften. Not just relief, but pride. The fire didn't win tonight, it obeyed. The fear never really leaves, but maybe that's the point. Life here is lighter when danger and safety dance side by side, keeping you aware, keeping you alive. By dawn, the village will wake to smoke curling from every chimney again. Everyone will act like survival was easy. Nobody mentions that invisible drama between spark and ash that happens nightly. You back away from the fading orange, heart steady, realizing every dream that survived to morning might owe its peace to one small act covering the fire, whispering a prayer, and trusting the darkness not to notice. You feel yourself slipping into somebody else's dream now, one that smells faintly of beeswax and anxiety. You're lying somewhere between the comfort of straw and the weight of theology, because in the Middle Ages, sleep is never just rest. It's a conversation with the divine. Dreams matter here. They aren't personal brain movies, they're messages. The body may be slack, but the soul, it's up there communing. You turn your head and see a peasant woman murmuring in her sleep. Her lips twitch, and her fingers twitch too, grasping invisible things. When she wakes, she'll tell her neighbors she saw her dead father warning of a coming storm, and they'll all take it seriously. Dreams, the priest will say next morning, are sometimes God's whispers. Sometimes, not always. See, there's always the other explanation. For every dream shaped by angels, another might come from the devil testing your faith. Books of the time warn against bad dreams, carrying demonic temptation. If you dream of feasts, you're greedy. If you dream of gold, you're prideful. If you dream of dancing, well, prepare a confession. Historians still argue whether dream interpretation served moral policing or cultural therapy. Maybe both. Either way, no one rolls over after a nightmare and just shrugs. Weird. You step closer to that woman's bedside, feeling the warmth still rising from her exhausted body. Her home hums with night sounds again. Babies cough, scurrying feet above. She stirs and mutters. Somewhere deep in her half-sleeping world, she's back in the fields, reaping endlessly under a sky gone red. You see it too, flickering like a lantern slide before your own eyes. The medieval dream bleeds its imagery across everything. The church writes thick treatises about this realm. The Somnium Scipionis from earlier centuries, and it's here survive here in sermon form. Dreams are ladders, said one scholar, on which souls rise or fall. They've built an entire theology around the idea that God might choose night as his messenger hour. It makes sense. Day is crowded, noisy, and distracted by pigs. You imagine heaven as the original late-night broadcast. You slip from one sleeping mind to another, a baker this time, snoring on his back. His fingers twitch in rhythm to kneading duff even now. He's dreaming of endless loves that turn to stones when he tries to sell them. Tomorrow, he'll joke that the devil was pranking him again. No one will laugh fully. Old folklore insists that the devil could visit through dreams, shaping illusions to test the faithful. There's a soft moan from across the alley, another sleeper fighting what they believe is the Mara, the nightmare spirit that sits on chests, crushing breath. Today, we'd call it sleep paralysis. Back then, it's an encounter with invisible evil. People describe being pinned down, awake but motionless, something heavy pressing, whispering, maybe even laughing. The devil rides at midnight, their neighbors whisper later, shaking heads. A century from now, someone will paint that idea into folklore art. The midnight hag crouched across the sleeper's ribs. You see one such scene replaying before your eyes. A teenager bolts upright on her straw mattress, silent scream caught in her throat. She crosses herself frantically, whispering Ave Maria. The heaviness lifts. Relief floods her, and she reaches for the tiny charm hung over bed, a sprig of rowan tied with red thread. Keeps demons out. Her grandmother promised. Scholars might call it superstition, but tonight it feels pretty rational. You travel then to a scholar's study across town, where dreams look different. Parchment spread across his table, covered in circles and diagrams. Astrology and philosophy braid together here. He yawns, rubs his eyes raw from candle smoke, and begins recording his dream. I walked among 7 stars, each speaking Latin. He believes each planet visits sleepers, bestowing secret wisdom or mischief depending on its position. To him, your unconscious is a cosmic messenger service. Above his desk hangs a copy of Macrobius's commentary on the dream of Scipio, copied by hand decades ago. Margins bloom with notes, dreams of prophecy, underlined twice, dreams of deception, marked with a skull sketch. Historians still argue whether this blend of pagan philosophy and Christian doctrine conflicted or complemented each other. The academic simply shrugs, dips his quill in ink, and adds another note. Dreams reveal the order of the universe to those who listen. You hover behind his shoulder, tempted to ask if nightmares count. But he's already nodding off, head on parchment, candle guttering dangerously. In his half-dream, the figures he just wrote start glowing, spinning overhead before dissolving into smoke that curls toward you. Latin letters that whisper single words: fate, faith, fire. The candle wobbles closer to the edge of the desk. You hold your metaphorical breath. The wax collapses, spilling molten gold down the wood and hardening into nothing more than another mark of obsession. Even dreams here risk burning the world down. Out on the streets, the dream logic continues in living form. People discuss their visions each dawn the way you might gossip about weather. I saw St. George last night, boasts one tailor. He told me my son would be a knight. Everyone congratulates him like he's already been knighted. Then another man confides, last week I dreamed I lost my shoes. That draws frowns. Losing footwear foretells loss of virtue, or worse, money. In a world without data, omens are the analytics of emotion. You slide through a market square at dawn, where a woman sells dried herbs. Her bestsellers: sleep helpers and dream shapers. Mugwort to banish nightmares. Rita to silence the devil. Bay leaves under the pillow to summon truthful visions. She insists it works. Her grandmother swore by it. Maybe placebo, maybe ancient pharmacology disguised as folklore. Either way, customers line up. Fear of dreams is good business. One hilarious asiding: medieval bestiaries even list animals with dream virtues. Sleep near a dolphin tooth to, why would you have one? To gain prophetic sleep. Tie pigeon feathers near your bed to encourage loyalty and love. You grin at the thought of village bedrooms adorned like apothecary menace. Yet each charm, each story, reveals something sweetly human. They're all trying to domesticate mystery, to file cosmic bureaucracy into a nightly routine. You return now to a small village hut as pale dawn leaks through cracks. The family begins stirring, yawns echoing softly. The mother pulls her shawl tighter and mutters about a dream of washing clothes that wouldn't come clean. Bad omen means gossip coming. Her husband rolls his eyes and says she always dreams dirty linen. She elbows him good-naturedly. Their laughter feels freer than most sermons. As morning warms the fields, dreams fade like mist, but their residue lingers everywhere. In warnings, jokes, choices, small gut fears. The medieval mind carries its twilight logic into the day. Maybe that's why faith feels so constant here. A day still belongs a little tonight. And you, drifting between minds all night long, realize something delicate. For them, sleep isn't quite private, and dreams aren't fully imaginary. In this half-lit century, imagination is still part of theology. Mystery a shared language between humans and whatever waits above. You start to fade too, like breath on cold glass, half wondering if you'll remember this dream when you wake. You're moving again, through thin beams of starlight that seep into narrow rooms, through air that hums with the rough soundtrack of the medieval night. You start noticing something you hadn't before. Nobody sleeps silently. You used to think peaceful slumber meant stillness, but here, it sounds like life itself snoring, whispering, creaking, and mumbling its way through darkness. The first sound to hit you is a snore, bold and unashamed. It drifts from the far end of a longhouse, rising and falling with a rhythm that could almost be music. This particular man snores like a saw in hardwood, slow, dragging, and strangely serene. His wife nudges him once, then twice, but he only turns his head, releasing a louder variation, the sort that rattles through the rafters. The dog sighs heavily, stands, and changes sleeping corners as if protesting. You smirk. For centuries, snoring has been both tolerated and mocked. Medieval physicians called it a symptom of excess phlegm or superfluity of humors. Their treatment: sleep, avoid wine, and burn rosemary under the bed. Imagine your partner lighting herbs like incense while muttering that you have too much phlegm, romantic in its own haphazard way. Across the same hall, babies hiccup, mothers shush, and an old uncle mumbles prayers to ghosts or saints, hard to tell which. It all blurs into the nightly hum of survival. Families share air thick with warmth, smell, breath, and noise. Privacy is a modern illusion. Back then, the dark meant you heard everyone's dreams. You step lightly through one larger house where servants drift near the wall, lying on thin mats while their masters sleep behind hangings. The fabric muffles sound but doesn't erase it. You hear the Lord snore like distant thunder, and underneath it, the whisper of a servant girl telling another her secret hopes. It's an informal bedtime theater, a chorus of ordinary needs set against the bass hum of human breath. Night, one scholar wrote centuries later, is the democracy of sound. Inside these thick wooden walls, you realize what he meant: status vanishes in sleep. Kings and beggars both wheeze and mutter. You chuckle quietly, thinking how even the mightiest knight has probably been elbowed awake by his wife for rattling too loud. One particularly grand bedchamber proves your point. You glide past curtains of embroidered velvet, finding the noble couple inside. The lady sleeps gracefully, face turned to heaven as if auditioning for sainthood. The lord, however, is the stuff of tavern legend. His snores reverberate through the oak beams. A page outside the door grins into his sleeve. He's on flame duty, pretending to tend the hearth while actually listening to this unholy doot. Noble snoring back to the crack of embers. Now, if you lean closer, you catch a softer layering the servants' whispers rising from the corridor. They talk in quick bursts, gossiping about whose bed creaked suspiciously early, whose candles lasted longest, or who claimed to see a demon under a neighbor's cot. Servant culture thrives at night. When masters sleep, their world finally breathes out. These side conversations, half-complaint comedy, are the era's closest thing to social media. One joke passes down the line. Our Lady's breath could blow out the fire. They laugh quietly, then resume folding linens, their giggles dissolving into sleep soon after. If there's ever proof that humor survives anything, it's this moment, crammed in the dark, still finding ways to laugh. In a monastery dormitory, the cacophony changes tone. No one's supposed to speak, yet human habit breaks rules effortlessly. A monk whispers a prayer too loudly, another sighs, another coughs rhythmically like a metronome. Somewhere near the middle, one brother snores so powerfully that two more join in, creating a strange harmony that sounds almost intentional, a monastic drone in D minor. A novice squeezes his eyes shut, torn between devotion and hysterical laughter. He later confesses, for her regular amusement. Historians still argue whether the vow of silence ever truly survived midnight. Sound defines more than the moment, it maps the architecture. You can tell who's poor simply by acoustics. In wealthier stone homes, echoes bounce richly. In peasant cottages, the low thatch and packed dirt swallow noise but amplify closeness. You feel the warmth physically vibrate, the blend of sighs, coughs, crackling wood, and the occasional muttered curse when someone gets kicked mid-dream. And then there are the outside sounds, the ones people pretend not to notice. Wind scraping shutters produces all sorts of imagined villains. Foxes shriek like babies, owls hoot warnings mistaken for prophecies. Down the lane, a drunk bangs into a fence post and begins apologizing to it by name. Someone inside bolts upright, heart hammering, convinced a ghost moans outside. Fear lives on the edges of all this noise like punctuation. A quirky tidbit here chroniclers recorded, night noise. Complaints even in medieval cities. One London ordinance from the 14th century bans late-night singing districts because such clamour disturbeth not only sleep but God. So yes, even in a world without alarm clocks, people still filed noise complaints. You drift toward the city gate now, hearing mingled sounds beyond the walls. Soldiers muttering, dogs prowling, a night soil man clattering his cart over cobbles. He sings softly to himself, a lullaby for no one except his own courage. Out beyond him, wolves call faintly through the trees. If you breathe deeply, you can taste the sound of civilization thinning, dissolving into forest. Back near the church square, a bell suddenly rings once, just once, to mark an hour shift for the night watch. The tone rolls slowly, brushing every rooftop. For a moment, the whole town seems to exhale. Snores pause unintentionally, sleepers stir, even dogs hush. Then the rhythm resumes, one great, uneven heartbeat of a world unconscious. You rest on an invisible ledge somewhere above all this, realizing you've never really heard sleep before. In school, they teach you dates, battles, kings. But this endless, ordinary soundscape is the truer history. Humans sleeping shoulder to shoulder, whispering half-dreams, trusting one another not to steal the blanket or the bread. Night teaches cooperation faster than any sermon. The strangest part, you find it oddly comforting. That snore from earlier becomes a lullaby of its own. The murmured prayers blend with rustling straw until you can almost feel drowsy yourself. You imagine lying there, pressed between strangers, hearing plus feeling life as one steady pulse. Hot breath, soft laughter, the rustle of shared exhaustion. For one heartbeat, the medieval world seems peaceful, almost modern in its messiness. You can picture ISO sound engineers cataloging this. Ambient medieval sleep, track 1. It's not silence that people long for, it's the predictable chaos of being surrounded by others trying to rest. You take a slow breath, matching it to the hundreds around you. A candle somewhere pops, releasing one last breath of wax and carbon before going dark. And you understand why no one minds the noise. Every snore, every whisper, every muttering servant proves something rare and sacred for this centuring people survived another day. And they'll wake to another morning. You wake somewhere between a dream and an itch. It starts small, just a tickle by the ankle. But soon it's the unmistakable medieval midnight dancing, the scratch you cannot politely mention. Welcome to the itchy truth about beds, the universal pastime of everyone from nobles to beggars. Turns out, 800 years ago, the phrase, beauty sleep, mostly meant, I hope the fleas take the night off. You roll over on a straw mattress and hear the faint rustle of movement that isn't you. A straw snaps softly. At first, you think it's the wood settling, but no. Something tiny, determined, and disturbingly confident hops across the linen sheet. You squint toward a flickering candle stub and spot it one flea, black and glossy. A conqueror in its own tiny empire, ready to wreak havoc. Historians still argue whether lice, fleas, or bedbugs were the dominant species of bedroom pest, but they agree on this. Every household had them. The records of kings and castles mention fumigation with sulfur smoke. Monastery rolls complain of brothers, bitten most grievously in their rest. Poorer households didn't bother recording bites. They simply lived in long truce with their six-legged landlords. You scratch instinctively, though you're only a ghost in this time. The people around you do it unashamedly. A boy half asleep beside his scratches without even waking. The father turns one-handed, long practiced. This is the kind of multitasking no productivity expert would envy, sleeping and scratching simultaneously. And yet, people managed hygiene as best they could. Sheets got washed, though. Washed means beat with lye and river water maybe once a season, or whenever the weather allowed. Between those sacred wash days, fresh herbs did the work. You lean closer to a bundle near the pillow, mint, tansy, sweet rushes. Their scent helps disguise the stronger smells of sweat, smoke, and straw decay. It doesn't kill fleas, but it makes everyone feel like they tried. In grander homes, the battle became an art form. Servants lifted feather beds daily, shaking and beating them in courtyards, feathers flying like snow. They sprinkled lavender or pennyroyal between layers. The medieval version of pest control meets aromatherapy. There's even a record of French courtiers perfuming sheets with vinegar and rose water before guests arrived. Whether it masked vermin or simply made the bites smell nicer is anyone's guess. The intimacy of discomfort is striking. In these rooms, husbands and wives share not only warmth but wildlife. Every whisper and bite becomes part of the marriage. And visitors, they bring gifts, of the itchy, unwelcome kind. A traveling merchant arrives in town with more baggage than wears a fresh colony of parasites. One night's sleep in the guest mat, and the house acquires a new ecosystem. The term, bed and breakfast, never meant so literally biological. You wander further into town where the night's more lavish. In a main chamber, silk curtains surround a massive bed so thickly draped it resembles a stage. You peek inside, hoping privilege might equal peace. It doesn't. The lady shifts, scratching delicately behind the knee. Her maid, sitting half awake in a nearby chair, notices and blushes. She dares not speak. Inside embroidered perfection, life still wriggles. Gold thread can't buy quiet skin. One fringe remedy surfaces across Europe, tossing bedding into winter frost. People believe cold air drives out bugs, and maybe it does. Villagers hang their mattresses on fences midwinter, snow glinting on linen like sugar. Kids throw snowballs at dangling sheets while parents scold them to stop stirring up the vermin. Spring arrives and everything warms and crawls again. The truly desperate call in smoke. You follow a woman to her kitchen where she's lighting a bundle of rosemary and sulfur, waving it under the bedding while muttering quick prayers. Clouds billow like holy incense, choking the room but promising salvation from the biting brigade. She coughs 3 times, swats the air, and declares the bed now pure. 5 minutes later, her husband's scratching through the smoke haze. Some victories are temporary. For all that, medieval people developed odd affection toward their nightly companions. One monk's journal complains about small vermin which humble me nightly and prevent pride. That's humility by pest. Another anecdote tells of a friar joking. The devil sent his messengers with wings. They saw irritation as part of divine testing, an itchy road to patience. You'd almost call it spiritual resilience. You crouch near a bed tore for even linen sheets, a straw pile shared by 3 siblings. They've spent the afternoon picking straw through fire ashes to sweeten it, their version of disinfection. The smell's pleasant, wood and dust, but the effectiveness hovers somewhere around placebo. Still, they laugh, turning it into a game of who can find the longest stalk without bugs. Small joys survive where luxury fails. In a tavern loft, travelers squirm side by side, scratching in synchronization like an orchestra out of tune. Someone curses softly, another laughs. Better fleas than thieves. They're writing away a few tiny bites beat losing your boots before dawn. Perspective, the eternal medieval coping strategy. You find one innkeeper particularly modern in spirit. He hangs signs outside warning, our beds be newly stuffed and most wholesome. Translation, fewer fleas per square foot. It's 14th century marketing genius. Does it work? Judging by the sleeping snorts upstairs, absolutely. People will always pay more for the illusion of cleanliness. Even scholars weren't spared. One doctor wrote an entire passage on sleeping itch, prescribing ointment from crushed pepper, vinegar, and goose fat. The result, by every surviving account, smelled worse than the fleas. Historians still argue whether such concoctions helped or merely distracted sufferers with the stench. Either way, it shows what desperation looks like scented like salad dressing. By early morning, the scratching ebbs. Fatigue beats frustration. The night cools further. Vermin retreat into seams and shadows. You walk over cracky planks slick with moonlight and look down at these sleepers. Peasants, nobles, pilgrims alike. They'll wake tomorrow scratching again, maybe wincing over red dots, but shrugging as if it's weather. It isn't romantic, but it's unifying. Nobody escapes the empire of itch. You find something weirdly touching about that. In a world split by class, poverty, gender, and faith, everyone still dances to the same nightly rhythm. Swat, scratch, sigh, sleep. Survival, small and shared. The candle burns its final inch, smoke swirling like phantom fleas in the air. You exhale, half amused, half unsettled. Behind you, the straw pile rustles once more, and you swear you hear a tiny, triumphant jump. The morning's faint light creeps back. Though morning might be an overstatement, you could still mistake it for night if not for the roosters bragging. Inside a small cottage at the edge of a muddy lane, everyone's already awake. Not because the day demands it, but because they've run out of places to sleep on each other. Welcome to the human sandwich family, friends, animals, one long, tangled survival strategy that doubles as the arrow's central heating system. You blink at the scene. There's the father, spine curved like a question mark, the mother's elbow on his ribs, and two children wedged horizontally between their parents' shins. A dog, too content to feel guilt, snores at their feet. Somewhere under the mound, a chicken clucks, unimpressed at the shared arrangement. The air is a cocktail of hay, fur, and old blanket. It's not glamorous, but it's warm. Sleeping together isn't scandalous here. It's logical. Roofs leak, winters bite, and embers fade fast after midnight. To share heat is to survive. Thick clothing and heavier quilts are rare, so families pile themselves into furniture economics class, 1 bed, 5 souls. It's the original communal blanket policy. Historians still argue whether this habit came from necessity alone or whether it also served as comfort in a frighteningly dark world. Maybe both. Fear of wolves, thieves, even nightmares, warmth cuts them all down to size. And the idea of my bed, your barely exists outside the noble's gilded walls. To sleep apart would seem wasteful, maybe even lonely. Outside, the frost paints the ground white. The house groans like it too, is stretching limbs. A cow lowing softly rises from the other side of a thin plank wall. You blink. Yes, that's right. The cattle live half inside. Their breath makes steam clouds that mingle with the humans. Keep the beasts close. The villagers say. They pay their rent in heat. A fringe fact you can't help admiring: having a cow in your living room was once a legitimate heating plan. One boy sits up, rubbing his eyes and bumping his head on the rafters. He mutters about the pig nudging his back all night. His mother laughs dry-leg. Better pig than cold. She wraps her shawl tighter and checks the tiny ember pit where yesterday's fire sleeps. It sighs as she stirs it awake. The room brightens enough to reveal shapes tangled in wool and limbs. Life here wakes collectively, like a creature unfolding itself after hibernation. You wander outside for a better look. Through every cottage window in the row, you can see the saming clusters of living warmth breaking apart slowly as the sun insists itself. If intimacy scares modern minds, these arrangements would cause fainting. Grandparents, parents, kids, cousins, sometimes unrelated apprentices. everyone lying edge to edge, breath to breath. One bed might host an entire lineage at once, a family saga condensed into 8 feet of linen. In noble manners, of course, sleeping together means something else entirely. You drift into a tall chamber lined with velvet hangings. It's quieter here, perfectly staged. The lord and lady share an enormous bed framed in carved oak. 2 small children lie near the foot, servants curled in blankets on rush mats below. One noble yawns, pulling curtains tighter, sighing dramatically as if privacy itself were a performance. The ironing even in grandeur, other bodies fill the room. Watchers, helpers, sleepers. The richer you are, the more people you share space with. Nearby monasteries echo the pattern minus the livestock. Monks line up in their wooden stalls like upright sardines. Each small cell is barely wide enough to stretch an arm, but voices murmur across partitions anyway. Even solitude here breathes communally. When one brother turns in his sleep, another follows in sympathy. In poor villages, guests complicate the geometry further. A traveler may arrive at dusk, knocking softly, hat in hand. The host family wordlessly shifts left, compressing the pile. The guest lies down, still wearing his boots. No one complains. Hospitality and proximity are the same thing. You realize that in this century, making room isn't figurative. A weirdly sweet bit of folklore surfaces around this. Some say warmth shared between bodies creates kinship and spirit. People believed you could exchange more than body heat. You could share luck, health, even mood. So if you slept beside someone joyful, you might catch happiness by morning. If you slept by someone gloomy, let's just say you'd rather trade bunks. Still, there's etiquette. The same rules that kept knights endurable also kept scandal at bay. Strangers slept fully clothed. Children barricaded adults accidentally with elbows. Couples whispered quietly if they were awake long enough to have a moment alone. Humanity invented subtlety suddenly when all of it could be overheard. The church mostly ignored these realities. It's hard to sermonize about morality when parishioners attend with hay stuck in their hair. As daylight strengthens, the animals rouse too. Chickens fluff feathers and straw beside the bed, a cow shifts heavily, and someone's goat sneezes loudly enough to startle everyone awake. The family erupts in laughter. Even in sleepless discomfort, the sound feels like daily rebirth, chaotic, warm, defiant. You step over the threshold and smell the outside world. Cold smoke, manure, frost, and bread rising somewhere down the lane. People here may have little, but they own each night completely. No mattress commercial could ever sell what they already know. With enough bodies, the dark turns harmless. In cities, it's another story. Inns teem with travelers squeezed shoulder to shoulder, a dozen to a bed. You peek into one attic dormitory and count patches of linen partitioned like slices on a communal loaf. Nobody complains much. The only rule is don't bite or snore too close. In some records, 2 strangers said to wake up, bedfellows turned friends. Or, occasionally, bedfellows turn brawlers, when elbows claim territory overnight. One innkeeper in York even keeps ledgers describing who shared with whom, an early form of roommate drama immortalized in ink. It lists a monk, a mason, and a merchant sharing one bed. The next entry says, quarreled for space, appeased by ale. Human nature printed neatly between the lines. You watch twilight fade into honest morning. People yawn, stretch, and separate, shaking straw from hair. The children chase chickens. The father jokes his wife stole the covers again. She doesn't deny it. Maybe comfort back then wasn't absence of discomfort, but shared endurance? A quiet agreement that the cold touch everyone except the space between them. A last look inside that first cottaging, the bed's rumpled. The fire's alive, and the family that slept like a litter of puppies is already laughing about dreams. You can almost feel it, a warmth lingering where fear would usually live. If ever there's proof that humanity survives through closeness, here it is. Heat born from bodies, not hearths. And somewhere beyond all that noise, even the rooster sounds oddly proud. The bells have barely finished their slow morning song when you wander towards stone cloisters. Colder than anywhere you've been so far. The air here feels cleaner but harder. You're inside a monastery, the world's most disciplined sleepover. Long, echoing corridors stretch ahead, lined with narrow wooden doors. Behind each lies a bed so simple it looks apologetic. This is where the professionals of sleeplessness live, the monks and nuns who treat night as a schedule rather than a sanctuary. You start in the dormitory. 40 or so straw mattresses, or sometimes plain wooden boards, line the room in military precision. Wool blankets fold neatly, corners sharp. At first glance, it's eerie. No chatter, no laughter, only the rhythmic rustle of cloth as one figure rolls over then another. Their robes serve as pajamas, uniforms, and moral armor all at once. Then, a single bell cuts the dark. It's called nocturnes, or matins, in other orders, the first wake-up call of the long night. The monks move automatically, no yawns, no groans like they've practiced this since birth. Maybe they have. You follow their procession down the steps. The torches along the walls give off oily smoke, staining the air with the smell of tallow and discipline. They enter the church in slow file. Candles bloom one by one like shy stars, lighting groined vaults overhead. You sense how small your own body would feel kneeling here at this hour. The chanting begins, deep and sustained, bass notes rolling through the stone until the entire building hums with it. They chant psalms about darkness and vigil, about the waiting of souls. Monastic sleep isn't meant for indulgence. 6 or 7 broken hours, carved into 2 or 3 parcels, each interrupted by divine duty. It's spiritual interval training. Sleep enough to rest the body, wake enough to prove control over it. Historians still argue whether monks ever adapted physically. Maybe constant half-wakefulness made them strange hybrids of human and alarm clock. When they finish, they return to their beds for a little second sleep before lauds, the dawn prayer. But not everyone falls back easily. One young novice lies staring at the beams above, whispering verses about temptation. For him, the hardest battles happen behind the eyelids. Monks write often about nocturnal troubles of the flesh. Translation: being human at inconvenient hours. The church solves this as elegantly as every more prayer, colder rooms, less meat. You drift outside toward the nuns' cloister across the valley. Their dormitory feels almost the same. Bare boards, heavy blankets, order carved in repetition. The abbess moves through rows of sleepers, candle in hand, ensuring humility remains intact. To a modern mind, it might look stern, but to them, there's safety in order. Their vows call for vigilance, purity, and obedience, virtues best tested at 2 a.m. One nun stirs and rises. She doesn't speak, but you sense resignation turned into peace. She kneels beside her cot and thanks God for having protected her in the night against the snares of dreams and the weakness of flesh. It sounds extreme until you realize she's describing ordinary exhaustion through holy vocabulary. In a world where fire, plague, and chaos wait just outside those walls, discipline is the closest thing to control. A mainstream historical fact in Benedictine monasteries, sleep guidelines were literally codified in the Rule of Saint Benedict. It set hours for bed and rising, dictated posture, even suggested that monks should sleep clothed and girded, ready to leap up if summoned. Imagine living like a medieval firefighter minus the engine. Now, there are fringe adaptations too. Some hermits go further, sleeping upright in wooden cells or chained loosely so they can't lie comfortably. Mortification through posture. You peek into one cell and see a man dozing vertically, head tilted against the wall, breathing soft as candle smoke. It looks torturous, but he dreams serenely. Maybe faith rewires nerves as well as conscience. You cross into the herb garden behind the convent, where moonlit frost rests on sage leaves. Nights like this, even the plants look contemplative. A sister kneels there, gathering sprigs for the infirmary. She prefers the solitude of night work and murmurs psalms while cutting stems. Her back aches, her fingers ache, but her eyes glow quietly content. Religion here isn't only control, it's rhythm, like breathing with the universe. Nearby, a small guesthouse hosts travelers seeking spiritual retreat. Through a half-open door, you glimpse a merchant collapse in a guest bed, snoring through his piety. 2 monks stand nearby, privately debating whether to wake him for matins. One sighs, let him sleep. The Lord will forgive ignorance faster than fatigue. Humor sneaks even into holiness. If you listen carefully, not all midnight chants sound solemn. Some monks develop friendly rivalries about who does off mid-chant. A slip of Latin becomes a suppressed grin, and instantly they all remember they're still human under hoods. The old abbot pretends not to notice, though he'll invent an extra confession session tomorrow. As dawn begins to dilute the sky, the second half of the routine sparks up. Bells for lauds ring again, echoing beyond monastery walls into waking villages. You can feel the sound sticking to frost. Villagers hear it as alarm clock, livestock signal, or literal music of the spheres. Monks file back into the chapel, identical from behind. They chant greetings to the sunrise long before anyone else sees it. One elderly monk stands apart, leaning slightly. His eyelids flutter closed mid-verse, exhaustion finally wins. No one scolds him. At his age, sleep and prayer are indistinguishable. He half smiles, drifting naturally from Latin to dream. It's a peaceful contradiction. Obedience giving way to the body's oldest faith rest. You leave him there, dozing mid-psalm, as light fills stained glass with liquid fire. The chants merge into the dawn chorus of birds. Even the divine world seems sleepy now, pausing between syllables. Maybe holiness wasn't about perfect wakefulness after all. Just persistence, the choice to grate every dark hour like a whispered conversation with eternity. You drift back toward the village knowing this, somewhere, even as ordinary people snore and scratch and tangle, another group keeps the spiritual lights on. Their insomnia powers the collective dream. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough reason for everyone else to sleep a little easier. You cross a dirt road cutting through rolling fields now glazed silver under moonlight, the kind of chill that seeps even into thoughts. A lantern swings ahead. You follow it until you smell ale, damp wool, and stables. You've come to an inn in the middle of the night, the medieval traveler's temporary kingdom, and by kingdom, you mean a loud room full of strangers who all snore in different keys. Inside, a smoky fire whines in protest as damp logs hiss. There's no greeting beyond a grunt from the innkeeper, who's busy stirring a pot that smells suspiciously like every meal ever made in that pot. The travelers around the long table look exhausted, rosy-eyed, and profoundly dirty. You can tell immediately who's been on the road longest, the ones explaining their journeys out loud, as if storytelling could scare away cold. When someone finally mutters, "Bed," the joke begins as there aren't enough. You follow them up a cramped staircase where straw mattresses line the floor like loaves of bread cooling after baking. Pressed close, irregular, and probably a bit stale. A tallow candle on a stool throws shadows that make the ceiling look like waves. The merchant sighs heavily. "I've slept in worse," he says, checking for lice. The monk beside him smiles politely. This seems optimistic for both. They're joined by a mason, a minstrel, and later a soldier with one boot. It could be the start of a bad joke or just another communal night. Yet, within minutes, 5 strangers are negotiating territory with surprising civility. Medieval overnight etiquette is an art form. Shoes stay on because theft is real, weapons lean nearby, and everyone claims at least a quarter of the blanket if lucky. Personal space equals 1 elbow's width, though that's more guideline than law. A rule of thumb: share warmth, not secrets. Conversations drop naturally after candles go out, shadows swallowing features until you can only tell people apart by rhythm of breath. Historians still argue whether inns were truly dens of chaos or just ordinary homes stretched for rent. Records show both, peaceful lodging alongside stories of theft, brawls of ale, and worse. But one thing is constant: sleep on the road meant giving yourself up to chance. This place pulses with mutual distrust wrapped in forced intimacy. You lie figuratively among them, feeling the plank floor flex beneath straw and bodies. Someone mutters a prayer to Saint Christopher, patron of travelers, whose image hangs crookedly near the door. He's seen too much. His painted eyes look tired from centuries of being begged for safe passage. A whisper from the far end of the room: a woman, sharp voice but amused, complaining that a rat just ran over her foot. Someone jokes it's the landlord checking if she's paid. Laughter spreads, the tense kind that feels necessary to keep anxiety at bay. Danger, darkness, and humor have always been roommates. Every so often the door creaks open. A blast of freezing air and the sound of horse hooves sneaks in. Another traveler, this one a tinker with bells on his pack, clomps through, apologizing under his breath. The innkeeper waves him toward the stairs. The candle wobbles, shadows swell and shrink like lungs. Upstairs, the tinker squeezes into what might be the last gap. He does something clever. Pulls his cloak over his face and mumbles, "If I can't see the lice, they can't see me." That earns snickers from his half-awake neighbors. Then everyone settles back into that communal orchestration sighs, sniffles, muffled snores, the scratch of straw shifting under hips. Strangely comforting, if you don't mind rhythmic wheezing. There's an open scholarly debate about whether people truly managed real rest in these places. Some diaries praise good, cheap bedding, while others describe a night of torment amid bugs and burping drunkards. Maybe it depended on how much ale stood between exhaustion and consciousness. You put money on the ale. Downstairs, the innkeeper's wife cleans pewter cups and mutters about how travelers shed more dirt than coin. She'll scrub floors tomorrow and pack fresh straw into the mattresses. Fresh? Meaning pulled from the stable corner least recently slept on. One corner glows faintly where embers still breathe. You sense how every medieval unjuggled two spirits, warmth and worry. Both lived rent-free in every guest's mind. Through the thin wall dividing rooms, you hear the soldier talking softly, describing wars nobody in the room fought but everyone feels. Then silence. Half an hour later, snoring again, the monk rolls over and quietly hums a psalm between snores, an accidental due to faith and fatigue. Later in the night, a knock on the outer door startles everyone. The merchant sits up, clutching his purse. No answer at first. Then the pounding repeats. The innkeeper curses, stomps down the stairs barefoot, swinging a lantern. A brief hush. Then the sound of a latch lifting, a cold voice, and the door shuts. When he returns, he mutters, "Just shepherds heading home." Everyone exhales at once. Collectively, they tumble back towards sleep like marionettes dropped into stillness. You drift above them, watching how vulnerability binds strangers. Each has locked coins, secrets, and grudges inside clothing. But here, they surrender unconsciousness to one another's proximity. It's strangely egalitarian. In darkness, all travelers share the same rank, future gossip. Before dawn, the first risers move. The minstrel cuffs, adjusts his lute strap, and starts plucking softly. That universal sign meaning, "I'm awake, you might as well be, too." Groans answer from every side. The monk prays quietly for patience. The innkeeper shuffles in a jug of watered ale and state bread as consolation breakfast. You taken the scene one last time? The smoky rafters, chipped cups, frozen breath shimmering near the one cracked window. Every discomfort alive, tangible. And yet, amidst it, laughter still tumbles out when the merchant jokes that the rat snored better than the soldier. You almost envy them. Their resilience stitched to humor, the way they survive discomfort by building parody from it. Outside, the sky whitens. Travelers groan their way to boots and belts, animals stamp in the stable. Ready for the long road? One by one, the remnants of warmth still ghosting the room. The bed mats cool, straw flattened. A faint smell of sweat and ale marking another chapter in the inn's eternal insomnia. You linger a moment longer, listening to emptiness take back the space. Somewhere across Europe tonight, 1,000 inns replay the same nocturnal choreography. Maybe what keeps travelers moving isn't adventure or trade, but the hope that the next bed, however lumpy, might carry dreams instead of fleas. For now, you float into the gray dawn, another guest nobody noticed leave. You leave the smoky inn behind and drift uphill toward a castle that pierces the dawn with crenellated pride. Everything about the place is designed to impress. Even the birds circling above seem to know they're supposed to look majestic. You slip silently through its gatehouse and into what you can only call the medieval dream suite. It smells of stone, wool, perfume, and political performance. Welcome to the royal bedroom, where sleeping is never just sleeping. It's theater. The long corridor to the chamber is lined with torches, each flame reflected in polished brass shields. Servants move softly, heads down, as though sound itself must bow before their master's rest. You follow them past tapestries depicting saints and victories. Propaganda with embroidery. When you finally step into the bedchamber, you almost gasp. The royal bed looms like a ship at Harburg, massive oak frame, steps leading up to it, curtains thick enough to stop gossip at least half the time. The mattress, layered with feathers and silk, looks so puffed you could drown in it. Pillows the size of small boulders sit against a carved headboard featuring angels holding crowns. Sleeping here isn't an act of fatigue. It's a royal decree of comfort. But not everyone's invited inside. You notice attendants sleep in adjoining rooms or even at the foot of the bed, ready to fetch wine, prayer books, or gossip at any hour. Personal space doesn't exist, not for servants, nor for the monarch who can't escape being watched. Royal privacy is a trick of curtains rather than doors. A noblewoman, let's call her Lady Eleanor, prepares for bed under supervision. Her maid removes layer after layer of clothing gown, undergown, chemise, each fold carefully laid aside as if the fabric were ranking higher than the humans. When only the finest linen remains, the lady sinks onto a stool while another servant brushes her hair. 100 strokes, not for beauty so much as display. The gesture says, "See how civilization tames even the night." Someone reads aloud from a devotional book. The lady prays with hands clasped, a candlelight carving her features into soft gold. Then she leans toward a small coffer near the bed. Inside are relics, a saint's bone, a flask of holy oil, tiny scapulars sewn in silk. They're nightly talismans against sin, sickness, or assassination. In this chamber, faith doubles as security system. For a monarch, sleeping is practically a public event. The chronicles describe courtiers lining up for the royal rising and royal retiring. Official ceremonies where servants attend as the ruler is dressed or undressed. To modern ears, it sounds excessive. To medieval minds, its governance made visible. Kingship required endless choreography, even of yawns. You linger as the bed curtains are drawn, muffling torchlight. Yet beyond those fabric walls, whispers ripple. Two ladies in waiting exchange idle speculation about who'll accompany the queen tomorrow, which cousin has fallen from favor, who might inherit a new estate. In noble households, gossip functions as lullaby. The air hums faintly with perfume and politics. An attendant settles by the dimmed hearth to stand watch. You realize many kings and queens slept under that quiet guard, not a matter of romance, but survival. Poison, arson, and betrayal all favored darkness. Even in their slumber, they staged their alertness, trusting servants as both protectors and potential threats. Historians still argue whether royal beds truly symbolized marital unity or more often political alliance. Some couples shared them rarely, using separate chambers as polite cold wars. Others, like Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, reconciled and quarreled equally fast beneath their embroidered canopies. The bed itself recorded more treaties than kisses. You drift to a side chamber filled with less regal sounds of muffled snores from guards, a creaks from armor hung too close to the hearth, and one fool practicing rhymes in his sleep. Even comedy has hierarchy. The dormitory smells of wax, iron exhaustion. Someone murmurs about being on call, always ready should the monarch stir. You nod to yourself. Rest in a palace comes with overtime clauses. Across the castle, another wing tells a smaller version of the same story. A lesser noble, anxious to imitate grandeur, dozes inside a scaled-down four-poster of his own. His behangings show faded hunting scenes, though wolves' faces melt into abstraction. His servants sleep nearby but not too close. They're expected to hear him summon in case of nightmare or indigestion, but not to witness either. Mimicry runs on every level of society, even imitation insomnia becomes status. Down in the servants' quarters, the night is simpler and more human. Straw pallets line stone floors, bodies curled around the warmth of a single brazier. Sleep comes quickly here, dreams are unrecorded but probably kinder. The chief maid snores softly. Two young pages whisper jokes under their cloaks until a steward grows them silent. The smell is smoke, sweat, onions, and humanity. Unpolished but honest. You can't help noticing how intimately architecture shapes rest. High ceilings and thick walls magnify quiet, but they also isolate. In the cottages you visited earlier, laughter and fear mingled comfortably because everyone shared air. Here the silence feels untrustworthy, rehearsed. Comfort can be its own kind of loneliness. A fringe tidbit from chroniclists, some royal astrologers prescribed sleeping positions to optimize fortune. They told monarchs to face east for wisdom or south for strength. One particularly ambitious astrologer claimed King Richard's nightmares stemmed from northward sleeping, which draws demons of the pole. You half expect someone to invent magnetic feng shui after that. As night deepens, the castle shifts tone again. Wind sigh through arrow slits, distant dogs bark from outer walls, banners whisper. Inside the royal chamber, the candle gutters low. Under mountains of bedding, Lady Eleanor shifts, half in prayer, half in dream. Beyond her curtain's edge, the shadow of the watchman keeps still. You could call it luxury, but standing there, you sense a strain behind the elegance. None of them are really free to sleep as they please. Beauty, ritual, and rank box them in as surely as cold and fleas trap the poor. Everyone, from straw mat to silk mattress, fights for peace with the same unconscious stubbornness. At last the room exhales into full dark. Somewhere far below, a servant coughs. Above, the tower bell gently counts another hour. You listen to its echo wash over the castle, touching the sleeping high and low alike. For a moment, the hierarchy dissolves. Every snore, every prayer, every creaking rafter joins one shared nocturne. And you think, maybe true royalty isn't about beds that touch heaven. It's the courage to close one's eyes in a world where even silk curtains can't fully block the dark. The castle fades behind you, its soft thunder of snoring nobles falling away until only sky remains. Deep blue, smooth as ink, wide as imagination. You tilt your head back, and the stars start talking. Not literally, maybe, but if you were a scholar in the Middle Ages, you'd swear they were murmuring secrets about your future bedtime. Tonight, you're not just stargazing, you're entering the astrology of sleep, where every restless night might be blamed on Mars sulking or the moon changing its mood. In this world, heaven and habit are inseparable. The tilt of the night sky dictates everything: fertility, fortune, and yes, fatigue. You float above a courtyard where a physician in a fur cap checks his instruments: a brass astrolabe, a candle clock, a cramped notebook of planetary alignments. Patients come not to talk about heartburn or bruises but sleeplessness. The stars, he insists, decide dreams. He peers through narrow windows like one might squint into fate's eye. Then he taps the parchment and declares, "Venus is in decline, no wonder you can't rest." Below, a merchant's wife nods, taking notes as if godly insomnia were a tax bracket. Shall burn rosemary for calm and pray before bed? Standard treatment plus celestial consultation. Historians still argue whether this cosmic medicine truly consoled people or just distracted them in a time without sleep apps. Either way, it worked often enough to fill ledgers. You flip through his chart and see the logic. The moon governs rhythm, growth, tides, wombs, and therefore dreams. Mars excites, Jupiter expands, Saturn depresses. Too much of one and your night turns chaotic. Saturn rising, expect grim thoughts. Moon full under Scorpio. Prepare for phantasms of lust. You grin quietly. Medieval humans didn't need fruit, they already had astrology's dramatic flair. Across the courtyard, a monk with a shaved crown scribbles a rebuttal. He's theologian enough to distrust astrology but curious enough to peek. He mutters, "The firmament was made to mark seasons, not your nightmares." His ink blots whenever he's uncertain, leaving tiny solar systems on parchment. Yet even monasteries kept lunar calendars for planning and fasting. Faith in stars forever in quiet negotiation. You drift toward a village square where a barber surgeon sets up his stool under a new moon. He tells customers to avoid bleeding at bedtime, while certain planets sit ascendant. There's a predictive poetry to all this, the body as microcosm of the universe. People sleep badly when cosmic harmony falters. And if you can't rest, maybe the fault lies literally in your stars. Under that logic, even ordinary nights carry meaning. Lovers timing their meetings check the moon firsting too bright, and the village might see too dark, and they stumble into the pit. Farmers consult almanacs more reliably than priests. Moonwalking, it's time for heavy sleep. Someone says, wrapping himself tighter in wool. The rhythm keeps the illusion that chaos has rules. In a higher tower somewhere, an astrologer employed by a royal court draws complex diagrams by candlelight. He notes the king's birth chart, the queen's transit, and murmurs, "A trine between moon and Venus? Good for dreams but poor for judgment." Imagine telling that to a monarch before bed. Yet they pay generously for bedtime reassurance in Latin. Even in royalty, insomnia loves flattery. The astrologer yawns, then sips watered wine. He claims he can cure nightmares by repositioning the bed. Face south for calm, he advises his noble patrons. Never east when Mars prowls. It invites fever. You realize you've heard this before? From peasants rearranging straw mats to follow the heavens. It's one of those cultural crossovers that trickle down faster than gravity. A fringe tidbit survives in surviving manuscripts. Certain star configurations supposedly birthed dreamers who saw the future. People born under Pisces or Cancer. Water signs tended to dream vividly, their sleep porous between worlds. The books warned these folk not to trust visions of gold or temptation. The devil paints in color. One margin note warns. You glance upward, smiling at the sky that refuses to blush. Still, not all astrology sounds absurd. Some of it accidentally stumbles close to science, recognizing lunar influence on tides and perhaps on human cycles, or observing that shorter winter days affected mood and sleep length. The difference is vocabulary, what we call circadian rhythm, they called cosmic sympathy. You float down into a farmhouse where everyone's already tucked in. A grandmother whispers to a child, "Sleep early. Little one, the stars are listening tonight." The boy asks which star watches him. "That one," she says, pointing toward a faint glimmer. "It keeps count of your yawns." He giggles, then curls tighter under wool. Faith, fear, and imagination blur beautifully when you're 6 and the cosmos hasn't yet betrayed you with logic. Meanwhile, in a tavern yard nearby, villagers debate under the same sky with less poetry but more ale. A miller swears his bad dreams come when the wind turns east. "That's Mars, right?" he asks the reeve. "Mars in my nightmares." The reeve groans, "Mars, you're drinking?" They rise together. Laughter bursts, warm and human. Sometimes superstition just makes conversation easier between neighbors who share walls than his secrets. A few hundred miles away in Italy, scholars copy Aristotle's on sleep and dreaming, arguing in scriptoria about whether celestial heat quickens imagination. One monk drops his quill, declares, "Only fools trust stars more than pillows," and trudges off yawning. The others quietly note the date. Every debate gets recorded as cosmic data. Maybe one day, someone will chart fatigue itself among constellations. By midnight, the frost glitters like miniature planets under your feet. You tilt your face up again. It's strange. You know these people are wrong about the mechanics, but right about the yearning. Looking upward for explanations makes insomnia almost romantic. The human need to give shape to chaos, transform skies into clocks, dreams into codes. Perhaps that faith? Misplaced but sincere. Let them rest at all. A final voice echoes faintly from some tower balcony, reciting lines of verse toward the stars. "May the heavens guard my slumber. May my soul roam the firmament true." That anonymous poet doesn't appear in any textbook, but his words hang like dew. Simple, wishful, a reminder. For all their theology and science, people still wanted what you want at this very moment, the assurance that the night has meaning. That sleep isn't just absence but communion. You let the stars blink once more, steady and uncaring, and drift downward where candles gutter out one by one. On rooftops and castle walls, from peasants to princes, eyelids finally surrender. Everyone is, in some way, sleeping under the same horoscoping that the universe, for tonight, has forgiven them enough to dream. The sky is paling again, emptying out its stars like someone spilling glitter across the horizon. With the heavens no longer whispering secrets, you start craving something more practical. Something drinkable, maybe herbal, definitely weird. The medieval world, you realize, didn't lack creativity in manufacturing its version of sleep aids. You step toward a cottage door that smells of honey, smoke, and something distinctly medicinal. Inside, welcome to another bedtime ritual, sleeping potions and herbal nightcaps, ancient cousins to your tea bags and melatonin gummies. The woman behind the table isn't exactly a witch, though a few nearby priests would argue otherwise. She's a healer, part apothecary, part gossip, part community internet. On the wooden table before her sit jars labeled with spidery handwriting: valerian root, poppy syrup, henbane, violet water, and something ominously called sleeping drops. Each jar tells a story of insomnia, anxiety, and the eternal human refusal to simply count sheep in silence. She stirs a pot simmering over low flame. The liquid's color could be described only as muddy but promising. Valerian root dominates the smell, earthy, sharp, and faintly like old socks. For quiet mind, she mutters, adding a little honey to disguise bitterness. She'll sell it to the baker's wife later, assuring her it stops midnight worries. Historians still argue whether such potions genuinely induced rest or simply convinced the drinker that rest was possible. Either way works when your brain races faster than time. You lean against the beam and listen. The healer hums a thin tune as she ladles a thick spoonful into a clay cup. Around her, shelves groan under bundles of dried chamomile, lavender, and roses. She explains more to herself than you. Each plant carries the sun's kindness. She's quoting an old herbal text written by Hildegard of Bingen, a Benedictine nun who basically invented the medieval holistic wellness blog. Hildegard swore that humans mirrored plants, both bending toward peace when treated gently. You take a step back into the village, where the scent of herbs wafts from several homes. Everyone seems to have some calming trick. One swears by warm milk spiced with nutmeg. Another prefers ale mixed with crushed lettuce, a sleep potion, recommended by physicians who thought lettuce cooled the blood. Hot blood causes sleeplessness, they say with alarming confidence. Some treatments feel poetic, others mildly criminal, like smearing henbane or opium paste on temples. It works until it doesn't. Inside a noble's chamber, the nighttime chemistries get fancier. The apothecary's boy stands ready with a tall glass of spiced wine, steeped with poppy juice and cardamom. The lady of the house sips it delicately, unaware she's basically micro-dosing herself into serenity. Candles flicker low, Latin prayers warp into soft humming. The line between medicine and magic blurs easily when both taste expensive. Of course, there are side effects. Some compounds cause vivid dreams, a double-edged gift. People interpret these technicolor visions as divine prophecies or temptations. A monk once documented falling into a holy ecstasy. after drinking Valerian tea, only to wake covered in ink from attempted midnight scripture annotations. The plant speaks loudly through sleep, he wrote. Translation: hallucinations courtesy of Mother Nature. Fringe cures drift through whispers too obscure for textbooks. One recipe combines mashed snails, rosewater, and vinegar, rubbed on the temples for restful stupor. Another involves boiling a black rooster, do not ask why, and inhaling the steam. Some claim the odor chases away waking spirits. You suspect it chased away dinner appetites just as easily. In wealthier urban centers, professional apothecaries make a show of it. Picture shelves of ceramic jars painted with Latin labels, glass vials glowing with strange luminescence under torchlight. Clients arrive at dusk, complaining of sleeplessness, brought by melancholia. The pharmacist nods solemnly, measuring grains of powdered pearl or gold leaf into sweet syrups. The logic: precious metals reflect divine harmony. Ingest them and your dreams become equally polished. Historians still laugh tenderly at this theory, calling it optimism disguised as alchemy. Meanwhile, common folk rely more on ritual than recipe. One woman sprinkles holy water on her pillow. A shepherd places a sprig of rue under his bed to confuse evil. A baker mumbles to his bread dough before sleep because someone once told him that yeast loves dreams. 2. Faith, superstition, and biology mix like random herbs in the same cup. You return to the healer's hut just as she finishes bottling her Valerian brew. As she lines the jars on the shelf, marking each with chalk symbols that look like runes but are really shortened for dosage. Half a teacup, she tells an old farmer hobbling in. More and you'll wake up next harvest. He laughs nervously, pays 2 eggs, and departs with his potential overdose smiling in his arms. She wipes her hands on her apron, sighs, and pours herself a smaller dose. Even healers need sleep. She toasts no one in particular, sips, and sits near the fire. In minutes, her shoulders drop, her eyelids bob like dangling shutters. You wonder whether the mixture truly sedates or simply tastes like the hope of silence. Outside her hut, the air cools fast. Night presses gently at windows again, drawing fragrances toward you. Burned herbs, damp soil, faint lavender. It feels almost modern, soothing in ways even the old chemists couldn't measure. You imagine how many identical scenes unfolded across centuries, tired bodies chasing the same mystery with leaves and faith. By the monastery gate, a monk prepares his own potion. Nothing fancy, just warm wine with honey and crushed balm. Before drinking, he whispers a prayer to Saint Dymphna, patron of mental distress. He doesn't believe herbs replace faith, but he also doesn't test God's patience by skipping either. The wine slips down. His eyes close midway through the second psalm. It's the softest surrender you've ever seen. The village grows still again. Bottles cool by the hearth, smooth glass fogging under sleep's breath. It's oddly comforting knowing the entire medieval world had something resembling a nighttime pharmacy. Not regulated, unscientific yet deeply earnest. Everyone chasing the same idea that rest must be brewed from something tangible. Before you fade completely, you glance through a window one last time. The old healer snores quietly, head slumped against wood, potion bottle glowing copper by the embers. Science will evolve. Pills will replace herbs, doctors will stop prescribing lettuce for insomnia, but her scene will relive endlessly in new forms. After all, every civilization keeps a jar labeled hope by the bedside. The trick is remembering to sip gently. The season begins to turn as you drift farther north through the landscape. Winter stretches long fingers over fields and forests, painting the edges with frost so fine it glitters like spilled sugar. Medieval people can feel it deep in their joints before it even arrives. That quiet tightening of all things alive. And with the shifting of the light comes an entirely different kind of sleep. Slower, thicker, heavier, dictated by daylight itself. You pass through a tiny village tucked beneath a ridge, each chimney puffing gray ribbons into the pale morning. The sun manages a brief, weak appearance, then immediately seems to reconsider the idea and retreat below the hills. The rhythm of life here beats in sync with that dimness. People wake later, move slower, and curl into darkness sooner. For 6 months of the year, they might spend half their time asleep, or at least pretending to. In winter, beds become fortresses. The straw gets replaced if possible, extra woolen blankets pile high, furs come out of storage smelling faintly of smoke. Children wear nightcaps that seem larger than their heads. In some homes, even hens are invited closer to the hearth under the pretext of saving them from frostbite, though the bonus warmth speaks for itself. Sleep now is community sport and survival ritual rolled into one. You pause by a cottage where a man sweeps snow from the thatch while his wife tends to the bed inside. She smiles proudly at its brilliance, 3 quilts thick and lined with rabbit skins along the edge. She pats as if greeting an old friend, murmuring, "You and I keep them alive, don't we?" Beds in winter carry that sacred duty. They're tools of endurance. Historians still argue whether medieval people hibernated. Evidence shows their nights extended naturally. The idea of segmented sleep, first and second halves, swelled into marathon slumbers broken only by brief waking. Diaries mention villagers rising, for prayers and eating, around midnight, and then to rest again till daytime gray. Imagine life organized by sunlight's absence rather than schedule. It wasn't laziness, it was biology respecting dusk. You drift outside into a January field. No sound except the wind's low moan through bare trees. The entire countryside feels tranquilized, tucked under an endless quilt of cloud. Somewhere beneath that silence, humans and animals share the same instinct, to do almost nothing until warmth returns. You can't help envying their surrender. Inside the larger house down the road, the things smell less peaceful. The hall reeks of damp boots hanging near the fire and onions stored too long. A nobleman sits by hearth, complaining of endless night to his steward. Sleep breeds laziness, he moans, stabbing at a log. If it weren't dark half of every day, I'd build 3 barns by spring. His steward nods wisely, not pointing out the obvious, that his lord hasn't lifted anything heavier than that log all winter. Aristocratic insomnia seems universal across eras. He calls for more candles, claiming light itself compels wakefulness. Dozens of flames spring to life, amber reflections trembling on gilt mirrors. But excess illumination can't fight the season. The noble still yawns, head tipping despite his speech about productivity. Even wealth can't outspend circadian rhythm. Meanwhile, in the monastery a few miles away, the rhythm shifts differently. Winter's long darkness feels tailor-made for prayer. Monks extend vigils, reading by candle while frost crusts the windows like sugar. They talk in low voices about the necessity of the season when the world sleeps long. One writes, "We learn the art of patience. But even holy patience meets its limits when the cold sneaks under the blankets." One sleepy brother, driven half-mad by numb feet, confesses to dipping woolen socks in sheep's tallow before bed, his desperate attempt at insulation. The abbot scolds him for vanity, but borrows the idea next night. Innovation spreads quickly when toes are on the line. Then comes the opposite season. The warmth returns abruptly, blinding and relentless. People's rhythms burst outward again, windows thrown open, sleep thinning like mist. You step through a fieldsman's camp in midsummer, where exhaustion competes with sunlight itself. Work runs late, feast nights stretch into laughter, and the body forgets drowsiness entirely. "We sleep less, but dream more," says one farmer between yawns, collapsing on a haystack before roosters multiply. Historians still debate whether medieval time counted seasons as emotional states as much as climatic. Winter demanded dreamlike reflection, summer commanded speed. You can almost see their reasoning: every field, candle, and lung moves to the tempo of day length. People didn't fight it. They bent with it. That's a kind of wisdom modern insomnia rarely allows. Now picture the Feast of Candlemas in February. Villagers parade through the streets carrying candles blessed against darkness. Children swing them proudly. Parents hum hymns about light conquering gloom. It's less about theology and more about surviving another winter intact. These are the equinox rituals of human sleep, the reassurance that the tilt of the earth, though cruel, eventually corrects itself. You drift onward, late in the season, toward a shepherd's hut high on the moor. The wind howls like a living thing. Inside, a man lies buried beneath layers of wool and sheep pelts. His dog curls beside him, one ear twitching with every gust. He opens his eyes just long enough to mumble a line from a psalm, then shuts them again. There's nothing else to do until dawn. Or spring. His life alternates between waking hardship and hibernating peace, the closest thing to sleep success humanity ever found. Some fringe sources even describe the winter dream, a collective cultural nap when field labor halted and minds turned inward. People told stories more, sang slower songs, carved small tools or toys by lamplight. With extra darkness came imagination. Even the body's metabolism slowed, historians suggest, evidenced by lower caloric needs and longer rest. Medieval Europe, in other words, practiced accidental mindfulness before hashtags existed. As you move south again, thaw sets in. Snowdrifts melt into rivers, mud replaces silence, and the scent of thawed earth is intoxicating. Beds become lighter, furs stored away, windows cracked for night air. Lovers meet again at forest edges. The cycle of waking resumes, and after so much sleep, the world feels like a reborn creature stretching its limbs. Standing at the edge of one village square, you realize the medieval year itself was made of naps. 6 months asleep, 6 months stirring restlessly. Their understanding of rest wasn't about control like yours. It was an ongoing negotiation with the sun. A child waves from his doorway, proud of the tiny bouquet of early flowers he's gathered. "See," he says, "the world's awake." His mother laughs softly, scooping him inside before the chill returns. The bed waits, warmth isn't confident yet. You smile, because even after all these centuries, the logic of rest never really changes. You sleep when you must, dream when you can, and trust the seasons to nudge you forward again. The seasons roll on around you, but the fragility of rest never quite disappears. Tonight, you find yourself in a dim stone room that smells of candle wax, vinegar, and something slightly metallic. Physician's chamber, or as close as the Middle Ages ever came to a medical clinic. The doctor sits bent over a table crowded with glass vials and dried roots, quill scratching furiously across parchment. No one here comes to him complaining of insomnia. They come to be cured of restless humors, melancholic vapors, or disturbed humors of the brain. And the treatments? Buckle up. He's muttering to himself as you draw nearer. Too much black bile, too much thought. His patient tonight is a tailor who can't sleep and claims that demons sit on his chest every night, sewing invisible thread through his ribs. The physician looks unimpressed, though he takes notes all the same. A humoral imbalance, he declares, reaching for a small brass bowl. We shall correct your sleep by drawing out the heat that torments your imagination. Translation: here come the leeches. You blink as he applies two of the small creatures behind the man's ear. The tailor grimaces but remains still. This is, after all, medicine. Leeches were supposed to calm fevers and Rebland's fluids. Somewhere between superstition and proto-science, the logic works like dream interpretation. Take something out to fix one's side. Whether it helps rest is anyone's guess. Historians still argue whether leech therapy comforted people physically or just psychologically, making them feel purged and therefore peaceful. Nearby, a jar labeled Papaver somniferum, opium poppy resin, sits like a holy relic. The physician calls it the milk of paradise. In mild doses, it's a miracle for dulling pain and coaxing sleep. In excess, a ticket to oblivion. He pours a single drop into wine and offers it proudly, proclaiming, "The body must forget itself before God restores it." A risky motto, but common. You wander through his cabinet of sleep aid, sticks of cinnamon, mint leaves, crushed pearls, even ground emerald prescribed for. Peace of heart. The wealthier the patient, the more extravagant the medicine. Poor folk, meanwhile, a settle for pennywort or a sip of ale before bed. One traveler writes that the best cure for sleeplessness, confidence in their pillow. You take that as the medieval version of just chill. In another corner, a female healer, maybe a midwife, maybe something less officially tolerated, brews her own remedy. She calls it the night's blessing G, boiled lettuce juice mixed with wine and vinegar, filtered through cloth, then sanctified by whispered prayer. She ties sprigs of chamomile above her door, less for fragrance than for luck. You sense she's part doctor, part magician, part mother to the entire neighborhood. Patients drift between these practitioners the way modern people drift between pharmacies and therapy apps. They crave rest, but they also crave an explanation. Every ailment needs a villain. One man blames sleeplessness on witchcraft, another on too much garlic, a third on his wife's snoring, which, frankly, might be the most credible theory of them all. Medicine in these centuries sits beautifully on the edge between care and chaos. Physicians write entire treatises on dream hygiene, pray devoutly, cleans the feet, avoid beans. Beans apparently cause mental storms. A 14th century scholar even recommends keeping the head cool by sleeping on lettuce leaves. You smile. It's all trial, error, and imagination dressed as expertise. Yet there's something touching about tirelessly they try to make sense of tiredness. A fringe tidbit: some doctors believe bad dreams stemmed from undigested food bubbling like a cauldron in the stomach. Their cure: a midnight snack of honey water to lubricate the viscera. Others swore that music cured sleeplessness. In wealthier homes, Harpists were paid to strum gently until masters' eyelids drooped. Imagine being a professional lullabist, not glamorous, but in huge demand. The tailor, now half dozing after his leech therapy and a mug of opium wine, starts mumbling a confession. I think my dreams sew me shut. The doctor makes a no-tag. Subject displays imagination unrestored. The healer sighs. To her credit, she suggests something radical. Maybe he just needs company. For a moment, everyone in the room pauses. She explains gently that loneliness itself breeds sleepless nights. Physician frowns but doesn't object. Her logic, though unscientific, outsounds uncomfortably true. Outside, village life mirrors the same tug between faith and fatigue. Housewives steep herbs, blacksmiths drink themselves numb, monks recite extra psalms. Every remedy circles back to the same needing to feel that rest is chosen, not given by accident. The fear of restlessness is ancient, a whisper that being awake too long might mean your soul has forgotten how to close its eyes. You peek into another house where an old scholar reads by lamplight, eyelids trembling as exhaustion sneaks up. He's writing his own medical speculation. Sleep, though gentle, is cousin to death. It cannot be forced but only invited. His quill trails off mid-sentence as he begins snoring. You can almost hear centuries of doctors sigh in relief. Someone finally found the cure by accident. Medicine, faith, and sheer will often intertwine here. A priest blesses beds with holy water one town over, claiming demons hate lavender. A surgeon experiments with cooling linens before rest, pioneering early sleep science without realizing it. Even apothecaries admit their recipes rely as much on chance as chemistry. Yet, somehow, their patients keep returning. Maybe because the act of being cared for, the ritual of trying, works almost as well as the tonic. You drift back to the healer's hut, where she cleans her mortar with a rag, humming a sad little tune about the night that steals pain. Through the open door, wolves howl faintly in the forests, their voices swallowed by snow. She finishes humming, climbs into her own cot, and finally allows herself a few hours of the peace she prescribes others. Somewhere far above, stars glitter faintly through frost-clouded air. You think about all those sleepless centuries, their wild elixirs and burning candles, the endless search for something to quiet the mind. Science will evolve, sedatives will multiply, but that same longing endures. Sleep remains exactly what it was for them. A negotiable miracle, half biology, half grace. The last candle collapses with a sigh, leaving the room steeped in smoke and the faint sound of even breathing. You smile to yourself. Against all odds, humanity managed to rest again. Leeches, lettuce, and all. You wake to moonlight that looks too bright, too exact, like someone polished it overnight. The world feels stretched between dream and motion. Somewhere ahead, footsteps scrape against cobblestone. You follow the sound until it leads into a courtyard where a door stands half open, the kitchen of a merchant's house. Inside, a woman moves in silence, eyes glassy as river ice. She isn't awake, but she isn't fully asleep either. You've just arrived at one of the strangest medieval mysteries, sleepwalking, or what they called noctambulation, the halfway haunting between life and nightmare. She walks slowly past the fire, skirts brushing the floor. The rest of the household snores in the next room, oblivious. She murmurs gibberish, half prayer, half nonsense, and reaches for a wooden spoon. Then she pauses, gasps soundlessly, and turns toward the door as if summoned by unseen orders. Her bare feet step onto cold stone without hesitation. You hold your breath as she drifts into the yard, trailing her own shadow like a tether. In this age, no one truly knows what's happening. To some, this woman is possessed, her body hijacked by spirits wandering the world while her soul stays in bed. Others imagine the reverse, her soul takes night strolls while flesh merely obeys. Historians still argue whether medieval minds saw sleepwalkers as victims of illness or messengers from the supernatural. What's clear is fear hung over them as thickly as moonlight. A neighbor once wrote of following his sleepwalking wife through the lanes. Her eyes were open and she answered nothing. He noted, equal parts terrified and fascinated. He called a priest the next morning, convinced an incantation was required. The cure involved sprinkling holy water and hanging a blessed key around her neck. 2. Lock the spirit within. Superstition held that if you woke a sleepwalker too suddenly, their soul might not find its way back to the body. Honestly, that's one way to discourage alarm clocks forever. You watch the woman drift toward a well, her posture odd but calm. Moonlight turns her white linen shift spectral. Somewhere nearby, a dog whimpers and hides. Then, as though remembering something secret, she pivots, walks back inside, and curls into bed without waking. A few seconds later, breathing evens out. Whatever she searched for, she found, or forgot. People in her world whisper stories about episodes for years. They say it's contagious, moral, or lunar. Those born under the moon's sign walk most, one astrologer claims. Physicians add their own flavor up. Too much vapor of wine rises to the head at night. So the cure: eat less pork, sleep on your right side, tie rosemary to your wrist, avoid gossiping after sunset. A sleep disorder or social advice? Same dosage. You travel next to a monastery where even disciplined faith can't prevent strange wanderings. Chroniclers record monks who stroll straight out of their cells during vigils, faces blank but voices chanting hymns mid-sleep. One brother wakes kneeling before the altar with no memory of leaving bed. The abbot, unsure whether to punish or promote, decides divine intervention probably deserves neither. They simply note it in the record Brother Thomas spoke with angels or dreams. Further south, village folklore gets darker. People swear that true sleepwalkers aren't ordinary souls, but creatures touched by witchcraft. Humans ridden by spirits? At night, a farmer caught his daughter walking across a barn beam 15 feet high, eyes open, steps perfect. He crossed himself and nailed iron horseshoes above the door at dawn, thinking metal scared spirits away. Secretly, he also tied her foot to the bedpost thereafter. Simple, unromantic prevention. Fringe reports suggest sleepwalkers could be guided by gentle voice or candlelight. Folk wisdom advises talking softly to lead them home. You imagine medieval parents whispering down corridors? "Come back to bed, my sweet." Like coaxing a bird trapped in the rafters. The tender fear in that action feels timeless. In cities like Paris, where rooftops knit tightly together, sleepwalkers become legends. One chronicle from the 13th century describes a baker climbing onto a parapet, balancing there as dawn broke. People below called him il somnambule volant, the flying sleepwalker. Some said he prayed so devoutly that heaven borrowed his body midnight. Others bet 5 copper coins he'd walked up there drunk. Faith and skepticism always shared the same pillow. Even physicians grew podic about it. A 14th century medical text declares, "The soul, when not content to dream, must wander to exhaust its fumes." Translated, maybe restless minds leak into restless bodies. That's strikingly modern for a century otherwise bloodletting fevers away. You realize medieval explanations aren't purely mystical. They're early guesses at what you'd call subconscious storms. In one noble household, the nightly hazard becomes dinner entertainment. The Lord insists his servant announce, "The lady has walked again." Whenever his wife's midnight journeys begin, guests gather discreetly to watch her ghost pass like an opera performer before gently steering her back. In the morning, she denies everything. That blend of fascination and fear feels intrusive but expected. Even then, privacy was faint luxury. Here's something philosophical shimmering beneath it all. Medieval people believed sleep loosened the soul's leash. To dream too vividly or walk too far endangered salvation. If the soul wandered too long, would it return? Priests warned against leaving windows open lest spirits slip out with the night's breath. Remedies multiplied. Amulets shaped like eyes, prayers hung under pillows. Even midnight rooster calls to reset the world's rhythm. You drift outside again. The same woman you watched earlier sleeps peacefully now, moonlight tracing her cheekbones. The key around her neck catches the light once before darkness folds over it. Fear and tenderness coexist quietly in that symbol. One side protection, one side faith. As you wander farther down the road, other sleepers murmur their own small adventures. A child whines mid-dream, kicking at invisible foes. A shepherd walks 2 paces outside his hut, then simply drops into snoring stillness beside his dog. The human body rehearses escape nightly, yet somehow knows its boundaries. Maybe that's why no legend records a sleeper who simply kept walking beyond dawn. Every story ends with return, however mysterious. The stars fade as cockcrow trembles through valleys. Sleepwalkers, wherever they are, pause mid-path, turn, and shuffle home without knowing why. You smile at the thought. No medicine, no charm, no doctrine resolve this mystery. But for once, ignorance makes peace with curiosity. The night shrugs, lets them sleep, and promises it won't tell where they've been. You wake to the low rumble of a church bell and realize the air tastes different. Heavier, like incense trapped in wool. A sermon has just ended somewhere close. You can tell by the way people shuffle down the street saying Amen, as if it were punctuation. Tonight, The theme feels awkwardly intimate sin beneath the sheets. Because when medieval preachers ran out of topics like fire or famine, they talked about the next big danger. What happens in bed when no one but heaven is watching? You slip into the back of the church, ears still ringing with echoes of Latin thunder. The priest on the pulpit stands like a small storm cloud in human form. His words spill out fast, condemning sloth, lust, and the secret idleness of flesh between dreams. He's not talking about sleep hygiene. He means temptation, those misbehaving thoughts that sneak under blankets while the moon blushes behind clouds. And the congregation, pretending not to relate, shifts uncomfortably on creaking benches. For medieval minds, sleep wasn't morally neutral. The bed was as much battlefield as refuge. At night, souls and sins supposedly met in close quarters. The devil, the priest warns, creeps into bed as warmth itself. Laughter breaks at the back pew anyway. One woman elbows her husband hard enough to echo. The priest glares, promising that laughter in the house of God invites him twice. Outwardly, everyone sobers up, but you can sense the collective squirm beneath cloaks and wool. Historians still argue whether church authorities genuinely believed dreams could be sinful or whether they used that fear to regulate imagination. Either way, sermons turned the simple act of sleeping together into theology. A conjugal bed became a moral calculus. Sleep close enough for warmth, but not too close for worship to notice. You follow a couple home after the sermon, a weaver and his wife, blushing from equal parts guilt and cold. Their cottage smells like malt and straw. They exchange a shy glance before blowing out their candle, whispering half-hearted prayers about purity. Old habits die hard. Humans have always apologized to heaven for being human. In small towns, sinful sleep takes on extra drama. People gossip that nightmares are punishment for lustful acts, that nocturnal emissions mark demonic influence, that even dreaming about another spouse might require confession. A poor mason once admitted dreaming of an angel kissing his wife and was assigned fasting on bread and water for 6 days. Not because he sinned, but because he enjoyed it. You can't tell whether to laugh or sigh. Meanwhile, monks in their cold dormitories wage their own nightly wars. One text warns against soft bedding that excites desires of the body. Another preaches the virtue of sleeping with arms crossed, as Christ upon his cross, a posture deemed anti-lust and pro-salvation. You picture rows of half-frozen believers learning posture therapy centuries before yoga, desperately hoping chastity survives until morning bells. Fringe tidbit: the humidity and theologians couldn't quite agree what as moral failure while unconscious. One scholastic boldly argued that sinful acts performed in dreams didn't offend God because free will slept too. His rival replied, "Even the sleeping man travels dangerous roads." It's the first recorded debate on ethics of sleep. Centuries before Freed could awkwardly high-five both sides. In a wealthier household, the subject becomes even trickier. The nobleman's chaplain, tasked with guiding marital virtue, reminds his employers weekly about proper times. Certain saints' days banned coupling entirely, meaning roughly 1/3 of the year was off limits. You suspect the servants kept better count than the lords. Sleep, already fragmented by bells and chores, must occasionally have felt like divine bureaucracy. You move quietly into a candlelit chamber that contrasts sharp light with monastery austerity. The lady lies beneath embroidered covers depicting saints ironically hallowed right above her face. Her husband snores beside her, utterly guiltless, the very image of forgiven man. In one corner, a crucifix catches fading light. She stares at it before whispering, "God understands warmth." You hope she's right. Theology rarely accommodates comfort. Elsewhere, those without spouses encounter moral suspicion of a different kind. Single adults, especially women, risk reputations if caught sleeping alone too comfortably, as idleness breeds suspicion of vice. So, ironically, many hire companion sleepers for propriety's sake. Rather than virtue, the practice occasionally fosters gossip of its own. The medieval night was a moral mazing, too lonely and you were suspect, too cozy and you were damned. The village, however, always finds humor in contradiction. A miller jokes to his friends that he sins most when he dreams about staying awake. They laugh, clinking tankards, half mocking sermons, half fearing them. Humans, you realize, are expert negotiators of guilt. They confess enthusiastically and repeat pleas tomorrow. Faith and frailty share the same pillow every single night. You walk toward the outskirts, where the dark feels freer. Among peasants, the grip of religion loosens slightly under exhaustion. No one preaches morality from a pile of frozen straw. They're too tired surviving to worry about invisible sins. Yet even here, before closing eyes, they mutter short benedictions against tempting thoughts. The prayer's rhythm sounds half lullaby, half insurance policy. Near the hedgerow, you glimpse a wandering friar sleeping under his cloak. His shoulders rise and fall, breath fog curling in moonlight. A tiny wooden cross dangles near his mouth. He turns slightly, murmuring, "Mercy for the tired." The phrase lands softly, less a plea than truth. Maybe that's the real theology of night, forgiveness measured in hours of rest. The next morning, villagers stir early and exchange gossip about last night's sermon. The weaver's wife claims she slept like a saint after confessing her doubts. The blacksmith chuckles, asking which saint snores as loud as she does. Laughter returns, easy and human again. Sin, confession, laughter, repeat. It's the rhythm that rocks centuries to sleep. As you drift away, church bells start another round of compliance, summoning everyone back to balance. You glance once more toward the now quiet cottages. Behind every shuttered window, faith fights fatigue, and fatigue always wins. The dark may frighten them with temptation, but it also grants mercy their waking hours never do. For all its warnings, religion can't rewrite biology. At some point between the warnings of priests and the size of ordinary people, truth narrows to one gentle image egg every sinner, saint, and skeptic closing their eyes the same way, hoping the morning light forgives whatever their dreams forget to confess. The air smells of smoke and iron now, thick enough to make breathing feel borrowed. You've stumbled into a night where peace is impossible, the world is at war, and even sleep trembles like a hunted thing. Somewhere nearby, a torch flares, half revealing a line of tents along a muddy embankment. Men snore, mutter, or lie staring at the canvas roof above them, listening for hoofbeats in the distance. Welcome to sleep on a battlefield, a contradiction so old it practically deserves its own banner. You walk through rows of soldiers wrapped in cloaks stiff with dirt. A few roll cigarettes of dried herbs or pray in low voices. They try to forget they're sleeping beside weapons instead of wives. One man uses his shield as a pillow. Another clutches a small wooden cross like a comfort toy. The ground beneath them isn't level, it presses rocks into ribs, and the cold seeps upward like memory. Yet somehow exhaustion wins, eyelids lower. A symphony of s'mores, ragged and unsure, begins. Historians still argue how much people actually slept in wartime. Letters suggest soldiers lived on naps measured in minutes, trained to wake at the slightest shout. Chroniclers note that after battle, camps often sank into eerie silence, bodies collapsing wherever they stood, too drained even for fear. You sense that nothing makes sleep more sacred than danger. A low voice nearby hums an old folk tune. You follow it to a soldier whetting his knife absent-mindedly while singing about home. He's technically on watch, but the melody sounds wary, like a lullaby for himself. We dream of cheer when war is near. The refrain goes, the edge of his blade gleams as if catching moonlight from another world. When his song ends, he leans against a log and dozes off mid-breath. The camp's doctor moves through shadows, checking anyone who coughs too violently. His eyes are sunken, his feet know every rut in this path. Sleep if you can, he mutters to a feverish boy. The boy tries, but the pain won't relinquish him. So the doctor mixes wine with poppy resin and drips it between cracked lips. By dawn the boy will rest, maybe forever. In these centuries, the death and sleep overlap so often that people treat them almost as co-conspirators. God grant him gentle dreams. Someone whispers, then corrects himself, adding a quiet amen. Away from the front, inside walled towns, sleep suffers its own casualties. Bells clang at odd hours, warning of raids or fires. Families cram into cellars, knees touching, eyes wide. Mothers hush infants with the same trembling hands they used to hang washing. When danger finally passes, everyone sleeps sitting up, half believing it'll return. Rest becomes survival, not luxury. One mother dreams she's spinning wool again in her warm cottage. Then she wakes to smoke and the acrid smell of burned timber. Her husband, gone south with the troops, doesn't appear even in her dreams anymore. Perhaps some part of her mind suspects the truth. She rocks herself gently, whispering hymns as the baby sleeps against her chest. The human body clings to rhythm even inside grief. Plague, too, knows how to invade sleep. You drift further south and find yourself in a city that smells of rosemary and loss. Doors are marked with crimson crosses. Inside one shuttered room, a man moans in fever while his sister fans him with a sprig of herbs. Between coughs, he asks, "Is it night or day?" She glances at the tiny window. Light doesn't matter anymore. Every hour is twilight when sickness fills the air. Rest, she tells him, though the word has changed meaning. Sleep here is both cure and surrender. In desperate quarters, people believe sleeping through the plague night might trick death. If your pulse slows enough, he might overlook you. Candles abound, rosaries clatter against shaking fingers. Sleep suddenly becomes theology again, a test of faith wrapped in shallow breathing. Doctors of the time carry long bird-like masks filled with herbs meant to cleanse miasma. When they bend over cots, they look like dark angels watching over nightmares. One physician writes in his journal, "The dying sleep best, they no longer fight for breath." Every word scratches quiet horror into parchment. Yet even here, amid terror, you find tenderness. Families still sing lullabies to the sick, as if rhythm could remind the heart what living feels like. A mainstream historical fact, during periods of war and plague across the 14th century, chronic insomnia rose sharply. People feared sleeping too deeply, worried they might not wake, or worse, wake to a world that no longer resembled their own. So they learned to rest in fragments, short naps, quick prayers, small escapes. Medieval resilience was measured in minutes of unconsciousness stolen between alarms. Elsewhere in a besieged castle, nobles try to imitate normal life. The countess insists on her prayer candles and feather bed, though cannon thuds rattle dust from the ceiling. Her maid yawns mid-sentence. "Sleep, at least pretend," the lady says, lying back stiffly like imitation calm makes it real. When finally she closes her eyes, her lips move in silent counting, names of servants, children, prayers. You realize even power can't script rest. Outside again, the stars return. Indifferent spectators. You see camps, cottages, and cloisters all soaking in their cold light. Over everything hovers that single exhausted certainty: humanity sleeps, even when it shouldn't. The mind, too fragile to stay running forever, finds its off switch in the middle of catastrophe. Maybe that's our oldest defense mechanism. Maybe it's grace disguised as fatigue. You imagine dawn creeping up, gold slicing through ash. Soldiers stir, villagers rise, candles sputter out. Everyone shares that blurry moment when dream and day merge, and, for a heartbeat, there's quiet. The man on watch pours water on dying embers and whispers, "Another night survived." His tone isn't triumph, just gratitude. If peace ever comes, people will sleep differently, he thinks. Softer pillows, thicker blankets, fewer ghosts. But some part of him knows everyone who lived through this will always half wake at imagined footsteps or unfamiliar silence. War rewires rest permanently. It teaches the body how fragile trust feels when your eyes close. You step back from the camp, listening as its noises collapse into sighs. In the distance, one soldier murmurs a line you might keep forever. War teaches us how heaven must sound. Quiet, after so much noise. You carry that thought while the wind moves gently through tents, extinguishing what's left of fear for a few short hours. The war smoke things behind you, replaced again by wood smoke, bread, and the sleepy murmur of daily life. You drift toward something gentler. Beds themselves, not as comfort but as symbols. In this next chapter, sleep as prestige. What you rest on tells the world who you are, and even how much you matter after death. The medieval bed isn't furniture, it's biography. You start in a narrow lane crowded with carpenters. Planks lean against the walls. The smell of sawdust feels almost sweet. One man is chiseling headboards, and as you step closer, you see each piece bears elaborate carvings, vines, initials, heraldic beasts. Even the poor order apprentice versions of these. They want proof they once slept somewhere that remembered them. A mainstream historical fact, the beds were among the most valuable possessions in medieval households. Wills often list them by name. One feather bed, one bolster, one pair of linen sheets. Handed down like property? In a time when most belongings decomposed with you, a bed could outlive generations. Historians find these details oddly touching, as though people recorded dreams in wood grain. In a small cottage, a woman smooths her sheets before evening. Her husband died last spring, but she keeps his half of the bed precisely made, untouched except for a few lavender sprigs laid atop the pillow. To her, the bed still belongs to both of them, separated only by direction. He dreams north. She mutters, a phrase you've never heard before but somehow understand perfectly. Medieval people measure space and life alike by orientation: east for dawn, west for death. The bed faces whichever you expect next. But status changes the scripts. Cross a city wall, and beds expand into platforms of ceremony. You walk into a noble solar chamber, bright with tapestries, heavy with expectation. There, a four-poster carved with angels and hunting scenes dominates the room. It's practically an altar to comfort. Servants gossip that their master's greatest fear is dying anywhere else. Noble deaths must happen in bed, surrounded by clergy. The Death Confession is almost performance art, a soul's closing night played before witnesses. At the far corner, the local priest keeps records. My lord was shriven upon his bed at cock's crow, blessed in the name of the Trinity, and gave his sheets to the poor. It's an official event, the boundary between biography and epitaph. Ordinary people mimic the tradition as best they can. On the edge of dying villages, even the humblest straw mat becomes a miniature stage where the world's final sentence is whispered. Beds also mark beginnings. After marriage, a guest sometimes followed couples to the bridal chamber for bedding ceremonies, cheering as witnesses at the threshold. Think of it as the loudest, least private start to lifelong intimacy imaginable. Lauder, prayers, and ribald songs fill the room, while the new couple hides their embarrassment under a fortress of linen. When the guests finally stumble away, leaving behind jokes about fertility, the couple's first night becomes folklore. You wonder how anyone managed to sleep after that much pressure. A fringe yet delightful tidbit some families kept: best bed. Purely for show, rarely used, dressed in the finest covers. It impressed visitors like a modern showroom couch. Shakespeare famously left his wife, my second best bed. And scholars still debate whether he meant it as insult or affection. The implication being the best. One was ceremonial, untouched. Reality might simply be that everyone slept in second place to appearances. Even monks, despite vows of poverty, invested symbolic meaning in their pallets. Some monasteries labeled beds by virtue rather than name. Obedience. Silence. A novice might lie down literally on humility every night. Maybe it worked. You can't imagine snoring while sleeping on an abstract concept. Out among common homes, craftsmanship thrived in miniature. You pause by a traveling vendor with small carved charms shaped like beds. People buy them as tokens for healthy rest or painless death. One mother purchases a pair for her sons, explaining softly that soldiers without beds need prayers portable in wood. You notice she kisses the charms before hanging them above her hearth. Death and sleep had always shared vocabulary here. The long rest and the final sleep, blurred boundaries. Funerary art even depicted corpses lying peacefully on carved cushions, as though comfort followed them past grave dirt. A tomb effigy of a knight in full armor shows his head resting on a stone pillow. Another, of a young girl, that cuddles a small dog. The details say she is gone, but she is warm forever. You follow a priest through an empty chapel late at night as he arranges candles beside a bear. He murmurs, "This is a bed, too." And he's right. The wooden platform looks disturbingly like one, its sheets replaced by shroud. The body sleeps till the trumpet, he adds. Then all shall rise. The quiet faith in his voice makes you pause. For hundreds of years, that metaphor sustained comfort, death as sleep, resurrection as waking. Back in daylight, the carpenter finishes a new bed frame and stands back to admire it. Elm for strength, oak for luck, he says, tapping the post. You spend half your life lying down, might as well do it properly. He grins the same grin that any furniture salesman would 800 years later. Commerce and comfort never needed translation. Night falls again, and you watch torchlight skim over rows of homes. Through thin shutters, you can almost read class by silhouette. Straw pallets glow dim and formless, upper floors shimmer with canopies like floating tents, yet every shape bends identically under dreaming weight. No carving, curtain, or coin changes that posture. Before sleep takes you, you remember the bed of the widow, the bridal laughter, the soldier's charm, the tomb. All versions of the same design, a rectangle where fear and tenderness share breathing room. Beds outlast people, but maybe that's their point. They hold the echoes of everything that once dared to rest. You see one more image before drifting on a child tracing her fingers over a carved bedpost, trying to imagine her parents young and dreaming in that same piece of wood. She smiles and yawns. Tomorrow, with luck, she'll sleep there too, beneath the same creaks, in the same unbroken story of closing eyes and waking up still alive. You float now through a silence so deep it hums, the kind that makes you whisper even when no one's there to hear. Somewhere below, a churchyard glows faintly where candlelight leaks from cracked windows. You've arrived at the edge where sleep and death nearly touch hands. the place medieval people blurred into one idea: the sleep of the dead. The village graveyard stretches behind the church like an unmade bed for souls. The snow glints on uneven stones, and each one, you realize, marks another name wrapped in the century's final rest. Someone carved tiny pillows beneath stone heads, others folded stone hands gently at the waist. Rest, to them, was never failure, it was simply the longest night before resurrection. You move through the rows as wind shifts loose soil, carrying the smell of moss and wax. A priest walks among the stones, holding a small lantern and muttering prayers softer than the breeze. Requiem aeternam, he says, as though tucking each inscription in for sleep. Burial customs here are the purest lullabies man ever sang to himself. In the medieval mind, the grave wasn't darkness, it was waiting. Death mimicked bedtime rituals. Washing, dressing, laying still. A body was put to bed, in the earth, wrapped in linen sheets called winding cloths. Family members often sprinkled herbs like lavender or hyssop into coffins, partly for scent, partly so angels would recognize the soul smelled clean. You smile at that. Eternal rest but fragranced. Historians still argue whether this soothing metaphor made people calmer about mortality or just romanticized it enough to tolerate. Either way, the links are everywhere. The tomb inscriptions showing figures reclining serenely, epitaphs beginning with, "Here sleeps," even funeral bells timed to imitate a bedtime chime. The world rehearsed dying every night simply by closing its eyes. You follow the priest inside the church. The air is colder here, though thick with candle smoke. Dozens of effigies repose along the wall, so knights in armor lying rigid, palms up, nuns carved with folded fingers over rosaries. They look unnervingly tranquil. Medieval sculptors called these images gisants, sleepers, not corpses. Their eyes remain half-lidded as if mid-dream. They are not dead. One abbot once wrote, but engaged in a holy slumber until the trumpet of dawn. Every century tweaks its metaphors, but none quite beat that one. Near the altar stands a narrow cot used not for living bodies but for vigil. Before burial, the dead lay here overnight while loved ones kept watch, candles burning through hours of silence. It's almost beautiful, the living refusing to let go just yet. You can imagine again, the daughters adjusting a father's sleeve as if he might still feel cold, widows whispering one-sided conversations into still air, brothers half dozing beside flickering light. Even grief needs small sleeps. A curious fringe tradition from France and England speaks of sin-eaters. Poor labor is paid to consume bread and ale placed on a corpse's chest, taking the dead one's restlessness into themselves. The logic defies science but satisfies guilt. So they may sleep cleanly before God, families said. You can't decide if it's barbaric or oddly poetic. Someone volunteering to inherit another's nightmares. Further along the nave, a sarcophagus bears an inscription you can barely read. In somno paces he rests and waits. The phrase repeats throughout murals and psalters. Sleep of peace. In a world often chaotic, this phrase becomes rebelling, a promise that one day there will be uninterrupted rest. No bells, no fleas, no fire hazards. Just quiet. The church built entire philosophies around this comfort. Purgatory was the restless version. Sleep disturbed by regrets, purified through dreams of penance. Heaven was the eternal good nap, full awareness gone, but warmth and light unending. A monk once wrote that every earthly bed foreshadows your grave and should remind you to sleep modestly. For you know not which bedding shall be your last. Bit grim, but efficient encouragement to make the bed. You wander outside again, where moonlight falls on fresh snow, smooth as linen across graves. Somewhere in the town beyond the walls, life continues, restlessly lovers whispering, cows shifting in barns, a drunk singing half a hymn. Yet out here, between sculpted angels and drifts of whiteness, you feel an almost domestic peace. Death, reimagined as comfort, loses half its bite. Across Europe, artisans carry the metaphor into literature and art. Manuscripts show skeletons sleeping curled like children, labeled Somnus Eternus, eternal sleep. In lullabies, mothers call their babies little Christs in slumber, half nervous, half tender. Maybe that's the strange human brilliance. You turn terror into metaphor until it sings itself to sleep. You kneel beside one weathered marker, fingers tracing grooves where Mose hides most of the name. All that remains legible is a fragmentum. He woke not but lives in dream. You think of all the people you've met on this long journey. Peasants, nobles, monks, soldiers, healers, each surrendering daily to practice death in tiny doses. Sleep trained them to trust the unknown. Even now, centuries later, you still follow their rhythm. Eyes closed, faith borrowed from somewhere you can't name. A faint sound approaches, the rustle of the priest returning, perhaps, or wind through stone. You realize the difference between dead and sleeping might be smaller than any age dares admit. Both rely on faith that morning exists somewhere beyond reach. As dawn stains the sky over the graveyard, the bells ring, the same tone used at bedtime, only longer, more solemn. You rise, whispering the old phrase you've heard repeated countless times tonight, requiescat in pace. May he rest in peace. May they all. May we? Because after watching centuries lie down bravely in the dark, you understand peace was always the harder part, not rest. You turn away from the churchyard, freezing air clinging to your breath like invisible lace. Out here, nobody moves quickly, not even time. The world exhales softly, and the dead remain utterly consistent, the only human beings who truly mastered sleep. The frost-silver graveyard fades behind you, but the whisper of its peace lingers like static at the edge of hearing. You walk now into a strange middle century. The candles thinning, the clocks beginning to tick. The medieval world is stretching, yawning, slowly becoming something new. People no longer sleep quite as their ancestors did, yet they still carry traces of that long darkness. You can almost see time itself shifting its weight from torchlight to lantern flame to gas lamp, pulling sleep along behind. Cities hum differently now. Late-night workhouses glow with constant fire. Blacksmiths and printers turn through hours once sacred to silence. Clocks mark time with nervous precision. Before, the bell tower reigned. Now each home keeps its own rhythm, and night begins losing its mystery. You wander past the tavern where merchants talk loudly about meeting at 9, as if hours themselves are currency. The medieval world measured rest in seasons. The new one counts by minutes. Still, old habits resist extinction. Inside a cottage, an elderly couple maintain the ritual of first sleep and second sleep, though their children tease them for it. You watch them drowse after supper, wake at midnight, share cider, whisper prayers, then fade again until dawn. The next generation, already infected by the tick of modern clocks, declares this slow rhythm obsolete. They want all sleep in one unbroken stretch, squeezed efficiently between sunrise and wage labor. Civilization, somehow, decides to multitask even while unconscious. Historians still debate what killed segmented city lights: caffeine, capitalism, maybe all three. Whatever the cause, humanity gains waking hours but loses something quieter. The dreamy midpoint, when voices of neighbors and stars spoke at equal volume. You feel a sliver of morning as factories replace that hush with the grind of gears. You pass through an early industrial city, soot clings to every brick, and the sky glows amber from 1,000 chimneys. Windows glare well past midnight. A young apprentice hunches over a loom, eyes heavy, body swaying. In the corner, another boy sleeps sitting up, head against a spool. It's shallow rest, mechanical and compulsory. Exhaustion no longer stems from fear of demons or long winter nights. It's produced by overwork. Sleep becomes an unpaid rebellion. For the wealthy, the shift smells sweeter. Candle wax gives way to hoil oil, then to kerosene. Light stretching deep into the evenings for reading or gossip. Bedchambers gain velvet curtains, imported lines, even mechanical warming pots. Doctors begin prescribing regular hours as virtue. One physician writes that sleep should be moderate, neither excessive nor irregular, lest it dull the intellect. The poor can't help laughing. Their bodies regulate themselves through collapse, not choice. In another home, a philosopher experiments on himself, timing dreams with a new pocket watch on his bedside table. He rises at dawn to jot notes about half-remembered images, declaring them proof that thought persists through unconsciousness. Centuries earlier, monks considered the same phenomenon holy vision. Now it's data. The soul has been rebranded as psychology. You wander to the window overlooking a street slick with recent rain. Somewhere down there, a night watchman makes his slow patrol, lantern bobbing like a cautious heartbeat. He hums a tune to stay awake, his footsteps echo through puddles. Not long ago, that single lamp defined all human safety. Now the glow from upper stories competes with it, claiming more of the darkness each decade. The boundary between night and day begins to blur, and with it, humanity's old pact with sleep weakens. Even faith adjusts. Where priests once warned against indulgent slumber, new Protestant ethics warn against sleeping too much. Early risers become moral heroes. Tracts praise farmers who wake, with the cocks and angels, implying heaven keeps office hours now. Ironically, this obsession births insomnia sermons, preachers worrying that the sleepless show insufficient trust in God. silence still haunts the periphery, demanding worship of its own. A fringe curiosity as night work expands, inventors pitch contraptions to simulate daylight. Mirrored lamps, glass globes, even sun engines. They claim constant light will banish laziness, ignorance, and melancholy. You suspect it mostly banishes dreams. Humanity is learning how to stay awake indefinitely and congratulating itself for it. But not every candle yields its glow easily. In rural regions, old customs cling stubbornly. Villagers still stuff pillows with lavender, hang crosses above beds, mark children's foreheads with soot on All Hallows Eve for protection. They whisper about witches riding those who sleep unguarded, though now, which usually means overactive imagination. Still, the rituals persist because something inside refuses to trust the new light completely. Every bright invention casts sharper shadows. You drift into a bedroom lit by both candle and lamplight, a perfect metaphor for its time. A woman sits reading aloud from the book of household management, absorbing instructions on health and domestic decorum. One must air beds daily to prevent foul vapors. She recites, utterly serious. Her husband snores mid-sentence, living proof that modernity hasn't solved snoring. Behind them, the clock chimes another careful hour. Bedtime, once a social ebbing, now feels like an appointment. Historians sometimes call this transformation the domestication of sleep. Beds become private fortresses, rooms locked, curtains drawn tight. Solitary sleep, almost unthinkable for peasants centuries earlier, becomes the measure of propriety. You learn to guard dreams like property, not share them like blankets. Privacy expands community contracts. Yet every lonely four-poster echoes faintly with the laughter of those who crowded straw pallets together, warmth drunk and unashamed. Progress has its ghosts. Toward the edge of the city, silence deepens again. The last lamplighter taps out his rounds, stars blink through smog like shy candles refusing extinction. Above everything, the empire of mechanical time ticks steady, an invisible overseer. You can almost feel medieval darkness sighing in its grave, displaced but not annihilated. People may keep longer hours, but their bodies still beg for rhythms older than any factory or faith. You pause to imagine the moment electricity will arrive, splitting night permanently from mystery. You suspect that when it does, people will long for these half-dark rooms again. The smell of wax, the rhythm of bells, the security of true endings every evening. For centuries, humanity built elaborate theories to explain why rest worked. Now it simply quantifies fatigue. Maybe understanding grew, but wonder quietly dimmed. And yet, as midnight approaches, even this new world surrenders. Lamps dim, presses still, workshops hush. In the narrow window of quiet, you hear the same sound that has followed you through every century, a collective exhale. The world remembering how to be mortal. No clock can pace the slow peace of that instant. The candle on the desk sputters its last flame, shadows reclaim the corners, and you feel the medieval night returning, not as nostalgia but as heartbeat. Civilization evolved, but darkness still waits patiently, whispering, "Go on. Close your eyes." The city's early clock towers fade behind you now, their cogs forever turning toward progress, never back. You drift into something quieter, warmer, a space untethered by time, where all the centuries of sleep you've walked through begin to dissolve together. It feels like dawn and dusk at the same moment. You're arriving at the end of the long road, dreaming beyond time. You stand in a vast meadow stitched with tiny lights, soft as embers, each one flickering like a small remembered story. When you listen, you realize they're not flames but breaths. Every sleeper you've ever passed, from monks to merchants, peasants to kings. Their murmurs hum together into one continuous lullaby that seems to say, "You survived another night." You take a step, and the ground changes beneath you. Old straw mats and feather beds materialize and vanish again. Centuries of fabric ghosting underfoot. This is what human sleep looks like when the noise of history falls away, pure suspension. The pause between motion and meaning. You see glimpses as you move, those villagers curled together for warmth, the monks folded in obedience, the queen behind her curtains whispering to faith, the soldier asleep on his shield. They were never so different. Sleep leveled every title, humbled every prayer, brought every ambition down to the same slow heartbeat. The straw itched differently, the blankets cost more, but the dream was always identical peace, however brief. Historians still argue about so many things. How often people woke at midnight, how long they prayed, whether dreams meant anything beyond digestion. But none of that matters here, standing just beyond their reach. You can feel their collective relief moving through time like an underground river, carrying you wherever exhaustion finally gives up its argument with life. It's strange, though, how it all loops forward into you. Your own nights, saturated with screen light and constant hum, still remember something older. Every time you wake at 3 in the morning wondering why, you're back in a cottage 600 years ago, stirring between first and second sleep. Every time you lie awake counting breaths instead of sheep, you echo a monk whispering psalms to steady his faith against the dark. Even the noises that surround you, fans, cars, distant electricity, are descendants of the same ancient lolong wind through thatch, bells announcing curfew, rain tapping stone. The medieval night isn't gone, it just wears earbuds now. You walk on. Around you shadows loosen, they stop feeling ominous and start feeling honest. The stars stretch wider, no longer symbols of fate but gentle witnesses. For the first time, you sense that maybe all those generations who feared the dark were also secretly fascinated by it. The way silence lets the human mind expand until it feels infinite. In one shimmer of memory, a healer stirs her Valerian brew, another flicker. Two peasants laughing in the straw, another. A dying knight clutching the hand of a priest as though anchoring himself to life for one more breath. The tapestry of sleep tightens, stirs, glows. You lie down in that great field, the earth soft beneath you. The lights above? Some stars, some old window candles, blur together until they look like constellations drawn by kindness. You become one more sleeper among millions, stretching across centuries. And as you close your eyes, you realize all history ever wanted was this quiet proof that despite hunger, fear, love, guilt, and endless change, people found a way to rest. Your breathing slows again. The field exhales with you. The long medieval night folds itself like a blanket and with a sigh, drapes across time. Now, the story thins to almost silence, the kind that feels weightless in your chest. Imagine a candle melting down to its final inch, the flame's voice turning into whisper. You lie here surrounded by ghosts who no longer frighten you. They sleep in abbeys, in fields, in ruined cities, and somehow their dreams are still warm enough to lend you one. Your heartbeat evens out with theirs. The past loses its sharp corners. Even the cold stones of the world soften. Little by little, language itself decides to rest, words slowing like tides falling back to shore. All the strange habits you've seen, the midnight prayers, the shared beds, the whispered charms, the potions, the fear of fire. They dissolve into something simple, something achingly familiar, like a human body surrendering a darkness, because it's the only way to begin again. Breathe in. You smell wood smoke and linen, candle wax and rain. Breathe out. Let the century yearn fade for a minute. The night doesn't care what year it is or what name you carry. It only knows how to close gently around the living. If you listen one last time, you can almost hear that universal murmur threaded through time. A sound made by everyone who ever lay down trusting morning to return. It's the world's oldest prayer, spoken in every language. Let me wake safe, and those I love awake beside me. And so you drift. The field becomes sky. The hum of history fades into heartbeat. The light behind your eyelids brightens once, softly, like dawn beginning somewhere distant and kind. The journey sleeps now. You can too. End of story. Sweet dreams.